Book 3, Chapter 81. The King's Answers. The Rakshishi said, "Well said, O counselor, your explanations are sanctifying and filled with spiritual doctrines. Now let the king with lotus eyes answer the other questions." The king answered, "He whose belief consists in the renunciation of all reliance on this world, and whose attainment depends upon forsaking all the desires of the heart, whose expansion and contraction cause the creation and extinction of the world, who is the object of the doctrines of Vedanta, and who is inexpressible by words or speech of humankind, who is between the two extremes of doubt, whether he is or is not, and who is between both extremes, that he is and is not, and whose pleasure, will, displays the world with all its animate and inanimate being, whose universal permeation does not destroy his unity, whose being the soul of all is still but one, he alone, O lady, is truly said to be the eternal Brahma. This minute particle is falsely conceived as spirit or air, because it is invisible to the naked eye. But in truth it is neither air nor any other thing except pure consciousness. The smallest of particles is said to be sound or words, but it is error to say so because it is far beyond the reach of sound or the sense of words. That particle is all, yet nothing. It is neither I, you, or he. It is the Almighty Soul, and its power is the cause of all. It is the soul that is attainable with great pains, and which being gained adds nothing to our possession. But its attainment is attended with the gain of the Supreme Soul. There is no better gain. Ignorance of the soul stretches the bonds of our worldliness and repeated reincarnation with their evils, growing like the rankest weeds in spring until they are rooted out by spiritual knowledge. Those who are in easy circumstances in life lose their soul by viewing themselves only as solid bodies that rise quickly to view like a dense mirage by the light of the sun. This particle of self-consciousness contains Mount Meru and the three worlds in itself like bits of straw. They are distinguished from it in order to present their delusive appearance to us. Whatever is imprinted in consciousness appears expressed without it. The fond embrace of passionate lovers in dream and imagination serves to exemplify this truth. As consciousness rose of itself with its omnipotent will at the first creation of the world, so it exercises the same volition in its subsequent formation also, like sprigs growing from the joint of reeds and grass. The hobby that enters the heart also shows itself on the outside, as in the example of children's whims. The minute intellect, small as an atom and as subtle as the air, fills the whole universe on all sides. As a cunning and conceited man deludes young girls by gestures, calls, winks, and glances, so the holy look of divine consciousness serves as a prelude to the endless rotating dance of worlds with all their hills and content. It is that atom of consciousness that envelops all things within its consciousness, and represents also their forms outside of it. Just like a picture on canvas shows the figures of the hills and trees drawn in it, standing out as in bas relief. The divine spirit is as minute as the 100th part of the point of a hair, yet it is larger than the hills it hides in itself, and as vast as infinity, being unlimited by any measure of space or time. The comparison of the vast emptiness of divine understanding with a particle of air is not an exact simile. It is like comparing a mountain with a mustard seed, which is absurd. The minuteness attributed to the divine spirit in the Vedas is as false as attributing different colors to a peacock's feathers, and of jewelry gold, which cannot be applicable to the spirit. It is that bright lamp that has brought forth light from its thought without any loss of its own essential brightness. If the sun and other luminous bodies in the world were dull and dark in the beginning, then what was the nature of the primeval light, and where was it? The pure essence of the mind situated in the soul saw the light displayed on the outside by its internal particle of the intellect. There is no difference between the lights of the sun, moon, and fire and the darkness out of which these lights were produced. The only difference is that of the two colors, black and white. As the difference between clouds and snow consists in the blackness of the one and the whiteness of the other, such is the difference between light and darkness, only in their colors, not in their substance. Both of these being inanimate in their nature, there is no difference between them. They both disappear or join with one another before the light of consciousness. They disappear before the intellectual light of the yogi, who, under the blaze of his consciousness, perceives no physical light or darkness in his abstract meditation. They join together as light and shade, the shadow inseparable following the light. The sun of consciousness shines by day and night, without setting or sleeping. It shines in the bosom of even hard stones without being clouded or having its rise or fall. The light of this blazing soul has lighted the sun, which diffuses its light all over the three worlds. It has filled the capacious womb of earth with a variety of provisions, just like they store large baskets of food in a warehouse. It enlightens darkness without destroying itself, and the darkness that receives the light becomes as enlightened as light itself. As the shining sun brings the lotus buds to light, so the light of divine spirit enlightens our intellects amidst the gloom of ignorance that envelops them. As the sun displays himself by making day and night by his rise and fall, so does the intellect show itself by its development and restraint by turns. All our notions and ideas are contained in the particle of the intellect. Just like a healthy seed contains it in its breast the leaves, flowers, and fruits of the fruit tree. These and all the powers of the mind develop themselves in their proper times, like flowers and fruits make their appearance in spring and proper season. The particle of divine spirit is altogether tasteless, being so very flavorless and devoid of qualities. Yet it is always delicious as the giver of flavor to all things. All tastes abide in the water, water being the receptacle of taste. Like a mirror is the recipient of a shadow, but savor, like the shadow, is not the substance, it is the essence of the spirit that gives it its flavor. All bodies that exist in the world and are unconscious of him are forsaken by the atomic spirit of the Supreme, but they remain dependent upon him, by the consciousness of the divine particle shining in their soul. In answer to, who are forsaken by and supported by the divine spirit, it is he who, being unable to wrap himself, wraps the world in him, by spreading out the clothing of his atomic consciousness over all existence. The Supreme Spirit is of the form of infinite space. It cannot hide itself in anything within its sphere, which would be like hiding an elephant in grass. Yet this all-knowing spirit encompasses the world, knowing it to be a trifle, just like a child holding a grain of rice in his hand. This is an act of illusion, or Maya. The Spirit of God exists even after the dissolution of the world by relying in his consciousness, Chit, just like plants survive the spring by the sap they have derived from it. It is the essence of consciousness that gives rise to the world, just as the garden continues to flourish by the nourishment of the spring season. Know the world is truly a transformation of consciousness, and all of its productions are like plants in the great garden of the world, nourished by the spring juice of consciousness. It is the sap supplied by the intellectual particle that makes all things grow up with myriads of arms and eyes. In the same manner, the atom of a seed produces plants with 1,000 branches and fruit. Myriads of kalpas amount to an infinitesimal part of a twinkling of the atomic consciousness, as a momentary dream presents a man with all the periods of his life from youth to age. In answer to, what twinkling of the eye appears as many thousand kalpas, even this infinitesimal of a twinkling is too long for thousands of kalpas. The whole duration of existence is as short as a wink of his eyes. Only an idea makes a twinkling appear a kalpa or many kalpas, just as the idea of satiety and starvation is a mere delusion to the deluded soul. Only lust makes the famished feed upon his thoughts of food. Despairs of one's life presents his death before him in his dream. All worlds reside in the intellectual soul within the atom of its consciousness. Outer worlds are only reflections of the inner prototype. Whatever object appears to be situated anywhere, it is only a representation of its model in some place or other, and resembles the appearance of figures in bas relief or any part of a pillar. But the changes occurring in external phenomena are no results of the internal, which, being the serene vacuum, is subject to no change. All existences present in consciousness at this moment are the same as they have existed and will ever exist inwardly, like trees in their seeds. The atom of consciousness contains the moments and ages of time, like grain within the husk. It contains these in the seed within the infinite soul of God. The soul remains quite aloof, as if retired from the world, in spite of the existence and dependence of the world upon the soul. The divine soul at all times remains unconcerned with its creation and its preservation. The essence of the world springs from the atom of pure consciousness. However, consciousness itself remains apart from both the states of action and passion. There is nothing created or dissolved in the world by anybody at any time. All apparent changes are caused by the delusion of our vision. This world with all its contents is as empty as the vault of the empty atmosphere. We apply the word world to phenomena, but it is an insignificant term signifying nothing. It is the particle of consciousness that is led by the delusion of Maya to view scenes situated in the divine soul in the outward appearance of the world of phenomena. The words external and internal are applied to the world are meaningless and not positive terms. There is no inside or outside of the divine soul. These are contrived for the instruction of pupils to explain its different views by consciousness. The viewer looking into the invisible being within himself comes to see the soul. He who looks on the outside with his open eyes comes to view the unreal as real. Therefore, whoever looks into the soul can never see false phenomena as realities as others do. It is the internal sight of consciousness that looks into the inner soul, which is without all desire. The external eyes are mere organs to look upon the false appearances of outer objects. There can be no object of sight unless there is a looker, just like there can be no child without its parent. This duality arises from the lack of knowing their unity. The viewer himself becomes the view, as there can be no view without its viewer. Nobody prepares any food unless there is somebody to feed upon it. It is the power of consciousness imagination to create the views of its vision, just like it lies in the capacity of gold to produce all the various forms of jewelry. The inanimate view never has or can have the ability of producing its viewer, just like the golden bracelet has no power of bringing gold into being. Consciousness, having the faculty of reasoning, cetana, forms thoughts of what can be perceived, chetyas, within itself, which, however unreal, are falsely viewed as real by its intellectual vision to its own deception, just like the deception caused by the appearance of jewelry and gold. The viewer, divine consciousness, being transformed to the view of the visible world, is no more perceptible in it than the jewelry of gold and not gold itself. Thus the viewer, becoming the view, still views himself as the viewer, as gold transformed into jewelry is always looked upon as gold. There being only one unity apparent in all nature, it is useless to talk of the duality of the viewer and the view. A word with a masculine suffix cannot give the sense of a neuter noun. The viewer who feasts his eyes seeing the outer visible world cannot have sight of the inner soul with the internal eyes of his consciousness. But when the viewer shuts out the outer view, all its realities appear as unreal. When the viewer perceives the unreality of what can be seen by the light of his understanding, then he comes to see the true reality. So by withdrawing the mind from seeing the bracelet form, one comes to see its only nature of gold. If what can be seen is present, there must also be their viewers to whose view they are apparent. It is the absence of both viewer and the seen, and the knowledge of their unreality that produce the belief of unity. The man who considers all things in the humility of his conscious soul comes at last to perceive something in him that is serenely clear and which no words can express. The minute particle of consciousness shows us the sight of the soul as clearly as a lamp enlightens everything in the dark. Answer 2. Who shows the soul as clearly as a visible thing? The intelligent soul is without perception of the measurer, and measured, like liquid gold dissolved from its form of an ornament. There is nothing that is not composed of the elements of earth, water, and the like. Therefore, there is nothing in nature that is apart from the nature of the atomic consciousness. The thinking soul penetrates into all things in the form of their notions. Because all thoughts concentrate in the intellect, there is nothing apart from it. Our desires being the parents of our wished-for objects, our desires are the same as our desired. Therefore, there is no difference between our desires and the object of our desire, just like there is none between the sea and its waves. The Supreme Soul exists alone, abounded by time or space. Being the universal soul, it is the soul of all. Being omniscient, it is no dull matter at all. The self-existent, being only consciousness, is not perceptible to sight. There is unity and no duality in it, but all forms unite into one in the great Self of the Supreme. If there is a duality, it is the one and its unity. The unity and duality of the universal soul are both as true as the light and its shade joined together. Where there is no duality or any number above it, unity can have no application to anything, and where there is no unity, there cannot be any two or more over it, because there are only repetitions of the unity. Anything is in itself such as it is. It cannot be more or less than itself, but is identical with itself like water and its fluidity. The multiplicity of forms which it exhibits blends into a harmonic whole without conflict with one another. The varieties within creation are contained in Brahma, like a tree with all the several parts in the embryonic scene. Its dualism is as inseparable from it as the bracelet from its gold. Although the many forms in nature are evident to comprehensive understanding, yet it is not true of the true entity. Like fluidity of water, the movement of air, and the emptiness of the sky, the variety of forms is as inseparable property of God. A systematic inquiry into unity and duality is the cause of misery to the restless spirit. It is the lack of any such distinction that is the highest knowledge. The measure, measurement, and measurer of all things, and the viewer, view, and vision of the visible world are all dependent on the atom of consciousness that contains them all. The atom of divine consciousness spreads out and contracts in itself by an inflation of its spirit, as it were by a breath of air. These mountainous orbs of the world are like its limbs. Oh, the wonder and great wonders of wonders that this atom of consciousness should contain in its embryo all the three regions of the worlds above and below one another. It is an incredible delusion that must always remain an inexplicable riddle, how the enormous universe is contained in the minute atom of consciousness. As a pot contains a seed with a huge tree within its cell, so the divine soul contains the atom of consciousness containing the chains of worlds outstretched within itself. The all-seeing eye simultaneously sees all the worlds situated within the bosom of the intellect, as microscopic sight discovers the parts of the future tree concealed in the seed. The expansion of the world in the atom of consciousness is analogous to the enlargement of the hidden parts of the seed into leaves, branches, flowers, and fruit. As the many forms of the future tree is contained in the uniform substance within the seed, it is in like manner that the multiplicity of worlds is situated in the unity of the atomic consciousness. Such can be as seen by anyone who will but look into it. It is neither a unity nor a duality, neither seed or a sprout. It is not thin or thick, born or unborn. He is neither an entity nor a non-entity, nor graceful nor ungraceful. And though it contains the three worlds with the ether and air, yet it is nothing and has no substance at all. There is no world and no non-world other than consciousness, which is all of itself and is said to be such and such in any place or time, as it appears so and so to us there and then. It rises as if unrisen, and expands in its own knowledge. It is self-same with the Supreme Soul. As the totality of all selves, it spreads to the entire emptiness like air. Like a tree springs from the ground according to its seed, so the world appears to sight in the form contained in the seed of consciousness. The plant does not quickly quit its seed, lest it would dry up and die for want of its sap. So the man who sticks to the soul and seed of his being is free from disease and death. Mount Meru is like the filament of a flower compared to the vastness of that atom. Everything that can be sensed has its place in that invisible atom. Meru is truly a filament of the atomic flower of the divine soul, and myriads of Merus resemble the cloudy spots rising in the sphere of consciousness. It is that one great atom that fills the world, after having made it out of itself and given it a visible, extended material form in its own hollow sphere. As long as the knowledge of duality is not driven out of the mind, it finds the charming form of the world, as in its dream upon waking. But the knowledge of unity liberates the soul from its stay in and return to the world, which it beholds as a mass of the divine essence. Book 3, Chapter 82. Friendship with the Rakshasi, Criminals as Food. Vasistha continued. The silly Karkati of the forest, having heard the king's speech, pondered well the sense of the words, and forsook her levity and malice. She found the coolness and tranquillity of her heart after its fervor was over, just like a peacock when the rain set in, or a lotus bed at the rising of the moonbeams. The king's words delighted her heart, like the cries of crane flying in the sky gladdened the passing clouds in the air. The Rakshasi said, "Oh, how brightly shines the pure light of your understanding! It glows as serenely by its inner brilliance as it is illumined by the sun of intelligence. Hearing the elements of your reasoning, my heart is as gladdened as when the earth is cooled by the supreme beams of humid moonlight. Reasonable men like you are honored and venerated in the world, and I am as delighted in your company as a lake of lotuses with full-blown buds under the moonbeam. The company of the virtuous scatters its blessing, just like a flower garden spreads its fragrance all around, and like the brightness of sunbeams brings the lotus buds to bloom. Company of the good and great dispels all our sorrows, just like a lamp in the hand disperses surrounding darkness. I have been fortunate to have found you two great lights in the forest. Both of you are entitled to my reverence. Please let me know what good intent has brought you here." The king answered, "O offspring of the savage race of Rakshasas, the people of this province are always afflicted in their hearts by a certain evil. It is the stubborn disease of choleric pain that troubles the people of this part. Therefore I have come out with my guards to find her out in my nightly rounds. No medicine removes this choleric pain from the hearts of men, so I have come in search of the mantra revealed to her for its cure. It is my business and professed duty to persecute such wicked beings as yourself who infest our ignorant subjects in this way. This is all I have to tell you and do in this place. Therefore, good lady, promise in your own words that in future you will never injure any living being." The Rakshasi replied, "Well, I tell you truly, my lord, that I shall henceforward never kill anybody." The king replied, "If that be so, you who lives on animal flesh, tell me how you can support your body if you abstain from animal food." The Rakshasi replied, "It has been 6 months, O king, since I have risen from my samadhi meditation and fostered my desire for food, which I wholly renounced today. I will return to the mountain top, resume my steadfast meditation, and sit there contented as long as I like in the posture of an unmoving statue. I will restrain myself by unshaken meditation until my death, and then I shall quit this body in its time with gladness. This is my resolution. I tell you now, O king, that until the end of this life and body of mine, I shall no more take the life of any living being, and you may rely assured upon my word. There is Mount Himalaya by name, standing in the heart of the northern region and stretching in one sweep from the vast east to the west. At first I lived there in a cave by its golden peak. I was in the shape of an iron statue, and also like a cloud fragment, and I bore the name of Karkati, the Rakshasi. There, by the austerity of my meditation, I obtained the sight of Brahma, and I expressed my desire to kill mankind in the shape of a destructive needle. I obtained the boon accordingly, and passed the great many years in the act of afflicting living beings and feeding on their entrails in the form of choleric pain. Then Brahma prohibited me from killing the learned, and he instructed me in the great mantra. He gave me the power of piercing the hearts of men with some other disease that infest all mankind. I spread myself far and wide in my malice and sucked the heart-blood of men, which dried up their veins and arteries and emaciated their bodies. Those I left alive after devouring their flesh and blood begat a race as lean without veins as they had become themselves. You will be successful, O happy king, in getting the mantra for driving away cholera pain, because there is nothing impossible that the wise and strong cannot attain. Receive immediately, O king, the mantra that Brahma uttered to remove choleric pain from the cells of arteries weakened by cholera. Come and let us go to the nearby river. After you are both prepared by washing and purification, then I will initiate you with the mantra." Vasistha said. Then the Rakshasi proceeded to the river side the very night, accompanied by the king and his minister, all together joined as friends. These two men, being sure of the Rakshasi's friendship by both affirmative and negative proof, made their ablutions and stood on the river bank. Then the Rakshasi tenderly told them the mantra that Brahma had revealed to her to remove cholera pain, and which was always successful. Afterwards, as the nocturnal fiend was about to depart and leave her friendly companions behind, the king stopped her with a speech. The king said, "O you of gigantic stature, by teaching us the mantra you have become our teacher. We affectionately invite you to take your meal with us tonight. It does not become you to break off our friendship, which has grown at our very first meeting like the acquaintance of good people. Give your ill-favored form a little more graceful figure, and walk with us to our home and stay there at your own pleasure." The Rakshasi replied, "You can well provide a female of your own kind with her proper food, but what entertainment can you give to my satisfaction? I am a cannibal by nature. It is only a Rakshasa's food that can satisfy me, not the little morsels of petty mortals. This is the innate nature of our being, and it cannot be done away with as long as we carry our present bodies." The king answered, "Ornamented with necklaces of gold, you shall be at liberty and remain with the ladies in my house for as many days as you may like to stay. Then for your food I will produce the robbers and felons that I seize in my territories. You will have them supplied to you constantly by the hundreds and thousands. Then you can forsake your attractive form, resume your hideous Rakshasi figure, and kill hundreds of those lawless men for your food. Take them to the top of the snowy mountain and devour them at your pleasure. Great men always like to take their meals in privacy. After your recreation with that food and a short nap, you can resume your meditation. When you are tired with your meditation, you can come back to this place. You can then take other offenders for your slaughter. Killing culprits is not only justifiable by law, it amounts to an act of mercy to rid them of their punishment in the next world. You must return to me when you are tired of your meditation, because friendship, even that formed within the wicked, is not easily done away with." The Rakshasi replied, "You have spoken well, king, and I will do as you say. For who is there that will slight the words of the wise spoken to him in the way of friendship?" Vasistha said, Saying so, the Rakshasi assumed a graceful form, and wore necklaces and bracelets and silken robes. She said, "Well, king, let us go together." Then followed the footsteps of the king and his counselor, who walked before her and led the way. Having arrived at the royal residence, they passed that night with their agreeable meal and discourse together. As it became morning, the Rakshasi went inside the house and remained there with the women. Meanwhile, the king and minister attended to their business. Over the course of 6 days, the king collected together all the offenders he had seized in his territory and from other parts. These amounted to 3,000 heads, which he gave to her. She resumed her fierce dark form of the black fiend at the night. She laid hold of thousands of men in her extended grasp, like a cloud fragment holds drops of rainwater in its wide bosom. She took leave of the king and went with her prey to the mountain top, just like a poor man takes gold that he happened to find in some hidden place. For 3 days and nights she refreshed herself with her food and rested. Then, regaining the firmness of her understanding, she employed herself in meditation. After 4 or 5 or sometimes 7 years passed, she used to get up from her tapas and return to where men live and to the court of the king. There they passed some time in confidential conversation. Then she returned with her prey of the offenders to her mountain seat. Thus freed from cares even in her lifetime, she continued to remain as liberated being in that mountain. Book 3, Chapter 83. Worship of Karkati as Kandara Devi or Mangala Devi. Vasistha continued. The Rakshasi continued her meditation and remained on friendly terms with the successive rulers of the Karata country, who kept supplying her with her rations. By the power of her perfection in the practice of yoga meditation, she continued to prevent all possibility of evils, to ward off all dread and danger from demons, and to remove diseases from the people. Over the course of her many years in meditation, she used to come out of her cell at certain intervals and call at headquarters to take the living creatures collected and keep to be her victims. The practice is still observed by the kings of that place, who sacrifice animals to her departed ghost on the hill, because none can be negligent to repay the good service of his benefactor. At last she ceased her meditation, and for a long time she stopped appearing where men lived to lend her aid in removing their disease, dangers, and difficulty. Then the people dedicated a high temple to her memory, and installed a statue of her in under the names of Kandara, Cave, and Mangala Devi, the auspicious goddess. Since then it is the custom of the chiefs of the tribe to consecrate a newly made statue in honor of the Kandara Devi, the goddess of the valley, after the previous one is disfigured and broken. Any king of the palace who out of his vileness fails to consecrate the new statue of the goddess Kandara brings great disaster on his people out of his own perverseness. By worshipping her, man obtains the fruit of all his desire. By neglecting it, he exposes himself to all sorts of evils and disaster. These are the results of the goddess's pleasure or displeasure with her devotees. Dying and ailing people still worship the goddess with offspring for remedy of their illness and to secure their blessing. In turn, she distributes her rewards among those who worship her in the statue of a picture. She bestows all blessings on young babies and weak calves and cows. She kills the hardy and proud who deserve death. She is the goddess of intelligence and favors the intelligent and presides forever in the land of the Karata people. Book 3, Chapter 84. Imperfect words used to guide to understanding the power of the mind. Vasistha said, "Rama, I have told you the worthy legend of Karkati, the Rakshasi of Imas, from beginning to end." Rama replied, "But how could one born in a cave of the Himalayas become a black Rakshasi, and why was she called Karkati? These I want clearly explained." Vasistha replied, "Rakshasa cannibals originally are of many races. Some are dark, and others are fair complexions, while many have a yellowish appearance and some of a greenish shade. As for Karkati, you must know that there was a Rakshasa named Karkata because of his exact resemblance to a crab. I only told you the story of Karkati because of her questions which I remembered and thought would serve well to explain the omniform God in our discourse into spiritual knowledge. It is evident that the pure and perfect unity is the source of the impure and imperfect duality of phenomena, and this finite world has sprung from its supreme cause, who is without beginning or end. These float like the waves upon waters, which apparently are of different forms, and yet essentially the same with the elements of which they seem to move. So creations, whether present, past, or future, are all situated in the Supreme Spirit. As wet wood, when ignited, serves to provide heat and invites the apes of the forest to warm themselves in cold weather, so the externally shining appearance of the world invites the ignorant to rely upon it. Such is the temporary glow of the ever-cool Spirit of God in the works of creation, which shows itself in many forms without changing its essence. The absent world appeared, and its unreality appears to consciousness as a reality, like figures carved in wood. As the products of the seed, from its sprout to the fruit, are all of the same species, so the thoughts, or chetyas, of the mind, chitta, are of the same nature of those originally implanted in it. According to the law of continuity of the same essence, there is no difference in the nature of the seed and its fruit. So consciousness, chit, and the thoughts, chetyas, differ in nothing except in their forms. Like the waves in water differ in external appearance and not in their intrinsic substance, vastu. No demonstration can show any difference between thoughts, mind, and consciousness. Whatever distinction our judgment may make is easily refuted by right reasoning. Let this error therefore vanish. It has come from nothing to nothing, and like all causeless falsities, it fails of itself. You will know more of this, Rama, when you are awakened to divine knowledge. In the meantime, do away with the error of seeing duality that is different from the only existent unity. After your attention to my lectures cuts the knot of your error, you yourself will come to know the significance and substance of what is called the true knowledge that is taken in different senses by various schools of philosophy. That which comes of itself in the mind is the intuitive knowledge of divine truth. You have a mind like that of a common people, full of mistakes and blunders. All this will undoubtedly subside in your mind through your attention to my lectures. You will be awakened by my sermons to know this certain truth, that all things proceed from Brahma, into whom they ultimately return. Rama said, Sage, you state the first cause in the ablative case indicating causation, that all things proceed from Brahma. This contradicts the opposite passage in Skruti scriptures in the same case, that nothing is distinct from him. It is inconsistent in itself. Vasistha answered, Words are used in the scriptures to instruct others. Where any inconsistency appears, they are explained. Hence, although not strictly true, we use a difference between visible phenomena and the invisible Brahma, just like we speak of ghosts appearing to children, though there are no such things in reality. In reality, there is no duality connected with the unity of Brahma, just as there is no dualism between a city and the sleep dream in which it appears. Again, God being immutable in his nature and eternal in decree, it is wrong to apply the mutations of nature and the mutability of will to him. The Lord is free from the states of causality and the caused of instrumentality and instruments, of a whole and its part and those of proprietorship and property. He is beyond all affirmative and negative propositions, and their legitimate conclusion or false deductions and refutations. So it is equally false to attribute the original will to God. Yet it is usual to say so for the instruction of the ignorant. There is no change in his nature, from its nothing to slight wish. These conscious terms and figurative expressions are used to guide the ignorant. The knowing few are far from falling into the fallacy of dualism. All intellectual conceptions cease upon the spiritual perception of God. There ensues an utter and dumb silence. When in time you come to know these things better, you shall arrive at the conclusion that all this is only one thing, an undivided whole without parts, and having no beginning or end. The unlearned dispute among themselves from their uncertainty of truth. Their differences and dualisms all end when they understand true unity by instruction of the wise. Without knowledge of the agreement of significant words with their meanings, it is impossible to know the unity, for so long as a word is taken in different senses, there will be no end of disputes and difference of opinions. Dualism being done away, all disputes are hushed up in the belief of unity. O supportive Raghu's race, place your reliance upon the sense of the great saying of the Vedas. Do not pay any regard to conflicting passages. Attend to what I will tell you now. From whatever cause it may have sprung, the world resembles a city rising to view in a vision, just like thoughts and ideas appear before the mirror of the mind from some source of which we know nothing. Listen, Rama, and I will relate an example of visible evidence for you how the mind, chitta, spins out the magical world from itself. Having known this, O Rama, you will be able to cast away all your false conceptions. Being certain of certainty, you will resign your attachments and desires in this enchanted and bewitching world. All these prospective worlds are machinations in the workings of the mind. Having forsaken these false fabrications of fancy, you will have tranquility of your soul and abide in peace with yourself forever. By paying your attention to the drift of my preaching, you from your own reasoning will be able to find a mite of the medicine that cures all the illnesses of your deluded mind. If you sit in silent meditation, you will see the whole world in your mind. All outward bodies will disappear like drops of oil in the sand. The mind is the seat of the universe, as long as it is not weakened by passion and affections and afflictions of life. When the mind is rid of the turmoil of its present state, it is set beyond the world in heavenly bliss. The mind is the means to accomplish anything. It is the storekeeper to preserve all things in the warehouse of its memory. It is the faculty of reasoning and the power to act like a respectable person. Therefore the mind is to be treated with respect, as it recalls, restrains, and guides us in our pursuits and duties. The mind contains within it the three worlds with all their content and surrounding air. It exhibits itself as the fullness of ego and the cornucopia of all of its microcosm. The intellectual part of the mind contains the subjective self-consciousness of ego, which is the seat of all its power. The other part, its objective part, bears in itself the false forms of the dull material world. The self-born Brahma saw the yet uncreated and formless world as already present before his mind in its ideal state, like a dream at its first creation. He saw it mentally without seeing it actually. He saw the whole creation in the self-consciousness of the vast mind, and he saw all material objects, the hills and all, in the knowledge, samvid, of his gross personal consciousness. At last, by his subtle-sightedness, subtle knowledge or clairvoyance, he perceived that all gross body were as empty as air and not solid substance. The mind with its embodying thoughts is pervaded by the omnipresent soul that is spread out as transparently as sunbeams upon clear water. Otherwise, the mind is like an infant who views the appearance of the world in an unconscious sleep of ignorance, but being awakened by consciousness, chit, it sees the transcendent form of the self or soul without the mist of delusion. The delusion is caused by the part of the mind that is aware of physical senses, and it is removed by the reasoning faculties of consciousness. Hear now, Rama, what I am going to say about how the soul is to be seen in this world of phenomena that is the cause of misleading the mind from its knowledge of the unity to the false notion of the duality. What I will say, by opposite similes, right reasoning, graceful style, and good sense to the words in which they shall be conveyed to you, cannot fail to come to your heart. By listening, your heart will be filled with a delight that will pervade your senses like the oil upon the water. Speech which is without suitable comparison and graceful phraseology, which is inaudible or clamorous, or has inappropriate words and harsh-sounding letters, cannot take possession of the heart. It is thrown away for nothing, like butter poured upon the burnt ashes of an offering that has no power to rekindle the flame. Whatever stories there are in any language on earth, and whatever compositions are adorned with measured sentences and graceful diction, all these are rendered acutely insightful through conspicuous comparison, as the world is enlightened by cooling moonbeams. Therefore almost every verse in this work is embellished with a suitable comparison. Book 3, Chapter 85. Brahma describes his own experience and asks the sun. Vasistha continued, I will relate to you, Rama, agreeably to your request, the story that Brahma himself told me of old. The mind, Manas, produced Manu, the progeny of the mind, who begat the Manujas, otherwise called men, Manavas or Manushiyas, the offspring of the mind. Once before I had asked the lotus-born God to tell me how these hosts of creation had come to be. Then Brahma, the great progenitor of men, granted my request and related the story of the 10 Andava, moon-like brothers, in his loud voice. Brahma said, All this visible world is the manifestation of the divine mind, like circling whirlpools and rippling swirls of water on the surface of the sea. Hear me tell you how I, the personified mind, first awoke on the day of creation in a former kalpa, with my volition to create and expand myself. Previously I remained alone, quietly intent upon the creation at the end of the prior day, kalpa. I had compressed the whole creation in the focus of my mind, and hid it under the gloom of the primeval night. At the end of the chaotic night I awoke like from a deep sleep, and performed my morning prayers, as it is the general law of all living beings. I opened my eyes with a view to create, and fixed my look on the emptiness all about me. As far as I could see, it was empty space, covered by darkness with no light of heaven. It was unlimitedly expansive, all void and without boundary. Being then determined to bring forth creation, and with the acuteness of my understanding, I began to discern the world in its simple ideal form within me. Then I saw in my mind the great cosmos of creation, set unobstructed and apart from me in the wide extended field of emptiness. Then the rays of my reflection stretched out over them from amidst the lotus cell of my abode, and sat in the form of 10 lotus-born Brahmas over the 10 worlds of this creation, like so many swans brooding upon their eggs. Then these separate orbs, or cosmic eggs, brought forth multitudes of beings to light within their transparent, aqueous atmospheres. Thence sprang the great rivers and roaring seas and oceans, and thence again rose the burning lights and blowing winds of the sky. The gods began to play in the ethereal air, men moved about on the earth, and demons and serpents were confined in their homes under the ground. The wheel of time turned with the revolution of seasons, and their produce and adorned the earth with their various productions by change of the seasons. Laws were fixed for all things on all sides, and human actions were regulated in the Smrti scripture as right or wrong, and producing the reward of heaven or the torments of hell as their fruit. All beings pursue their enjoyment and liberty, and the more they strive for their desired objects, the better they thrive in them. In this way, the 7 worlds and continents, the 7 oceans, and the 7 boundary mountains were brought into existence, and they continue to exist until their final dissolution at the end of a kalpa period. The primeval darkness from the face of open lands fled before the lights and took its refuge into mountain caverns and hollow caves. It abides in some places allied with light, as in the shady and sunny forest lands and lawns. The blue sky, like a lake of bright lotuses, is haunted by the fragments of dark clouds resembling swarms of black bees on high. The stars that twinkle in it are all like the yellow filaments of flowers shaken by the wind. The huge heaps of snow setting in the valleys of high hills resemble the lofty cottonwood trees, beset by their pods of cotton. The earth is surrounded by the polar mountains serving as her girdles, and the circles of polar seas serve as her sounding anklets and trinkets. She is covered by the polar darkness as if by a blue garment, and studded all about with gems growing and glowing in her bosoms of rich and ample mines and seas. The earth, covered by the ornaments of her greenness of vegetation, resembles a lady sitting dressed in her robes, having the produce of rice for her food, and the busy buzz of the world for her music. The sky appears like a bride veiled under the black covering of night, with glittering chains of stars for her jewels. Seasonal fruits and flowers hanging in the air resemble wreaths of lotuses about her body. The orbs of worlds appear like beautiful pomegranate fruits containing all the people in them, like the shining seeds in the cells of these fruit. Bright moonbeams, stretching both above and below and around the 3 sides, appear like the white sacred thread girding the world above and below and all about, or like the Ganges river running in 3 directions in the upper, low, and nether worlds. The clouds dispersing on all sides with their glittering lightning appear like the leaves and flowers of airborne forest, blown away by the breezes on all sides. But all these worlds, with their lands and seas, their skies, and all their content, are in reality as unreal as visionary dreams, and as delusive as the enchanted city of a fairyland. The gods, demons, men, and serpents, seen in multitudes in all worlds, are like bodies of buzzing gnats fluttering about fig trees. Her time is moving on with this train of moments and minutes, his ages, yugas, and kalpas, in expectation of the unforeseen destruction of all things. Having seen all these things in my pure and enlightened understanding, I was quite confounded to think from where all these could have come into being. Why is it that I not see all that I perceive with my visual organs, like a magic scene spread out in the sphere of my mind? Having looked into these for a long time with my steadfast attention, I called to me the brightest sun of these luminous spheres, and addressed him, saying, "Approach me, O God of gods, luminous sun. I welcome you to me." Having approached, I said, "Tell me what you are, and how this world with all its bright orbs came to be. You know anything of this, then please reveal it to me." Being thus addressed, he looked upon me, and then, having recognized me, he made his salutation, and uttered in graceful words and speech. The sun replied, "O Lord, you are the eternal cause of these false phenomena. How is it that you do not know it, and ask me about its cause? But should you, all-knowing as you are, take a delight in hearing my speech, I will tell you of my unasked and unthought-of production, which I beg you to listen to. O Great Spirit, this world is composed of reality and unreality in its twofold view. It beguiles understanding to take it sometimes for a real, and at other times for an unreal thing. It is the great mind of the divine soul that is employed in these constant and unceasingly endless creations for its diversion." Book 3, Chapter 86, The Son's Story of Indus and his wife's Tapas and their 10 sons, the Aindavas. The son continued, "It was, my lord, only the other day of one of your previous kalpas, and at the foot of the mountain beside the tableland of Mount Kailash that stands in the corner of the continent of Asia, that there lived a man named Suranjata, together with all his sons and their progeny, who made that place a beautiful and pleasant home. Among them lived a Brahmin named Indu, a descendant of the patriarch Kasyapa, who was a saintly soul, virtuous and acquainted with divine knowledge. He resided in his house with all his relatives and passed his time agreeably in company with his wife, who was as dear to his heart as if his second self. But this virtuous couple had no children, as no grass grows in sterile soil, and the wife remained discontent at the unfruitfulness of her blossoming or seed. With all the purity and simplicity of their hearts, and the beauty and gracefulness of their person and manners, they were as useless to the earth as the fair and straight stem of the pure rice plant without its stalk of grain. The unhappy couple left for the mountain in order to make their tapas for the blessing of children. They ascended Mount Kailash, which lacked any shade from shade trees, and was uninhabited by living beings. There they stood fixed on one side like a couple of trees in a barren desert. They remained in their austere tapas, subsisting upon liquid food, which also supported the trees. At the close of the day, and from the hollow of their palms, they drank only a sip of water from a neighboring cascade. They remained standing and unmoved as immovable trees, and continued long in that posture in the manner of an erect wood in heat and cold. In this manner they passed 2 ages before their meditations met with the approval of the god who bears the crescent of the moon on his forehead, Shiva. The god with the cooling moonbeams on his forehead advanced towards the parched pair, like when the moon casts her dewy light on the trees and lotuses dried and scorched under the burning sunbeams of a summer day. The god appeared to them, mounted on his milk-white bull, and clasping the fair Uma, goddess Parvati, on his left, and holding the beaming moon on his head, like spring season approaches green shrubs, strewing flowers upon them. The couple's faces and eyes brightened as they saw the god, just like lotuses hail the appearance of the beautiful moon. They bowed down to the god of the silvery crescent of snow-white face. Then the god, rising to their view like a full moon, and appearing in the midst of the heaven and earth, spoke smilingly to them in a gentle and audible voice. The breath of that voice refreshed them like the breath of spring revives the faded plants of a forest. Shiva said, "I am pleased with your meditation, O Brahman. Offer your prayer to me, and have your desired reward granted to you immediately." The Brahman replied, "O Lord of gods, please favor me with 10 intelligent male children. Let these be born to me to dispel all my sorrow." The son continued. The god said, "Be it so," and then disappeared into the air. His great body passed through the ethereal path with a tremendous roar of thunder, like the surge of the sea. Then the Brahmin couple returned to their home with gladness in their hearts. They appeared like the reflections of 2 gods, Shiva and Uma. After returning, the Brahmini became big with child from the blessing she received from her god Shiva. In her pregnant state, she looked like a thick cloud heavy with rainwater. In proper time, she brought forth a boy as beautiful as a digit of a new moon. In this way, she bore 10 sons in succession, each as handsome as the tender sprouts of plants. They grew up in strength and stature and were invested with a sacramental thread. In course of a short time they attained their boyhood and became conversant in the language of the gods, Sanskrit, like the mute clouds became loud in the rainy season. They shone in their circle with the luster of their bodies, as the resplendent orbs of the sky burn and turn about in their spheres. In time these youth lost both parents, who passed off their mortal coils to go to their last abode. Losing both parents, the 10 Brahmin lads left their home in grief and went to the top of Mount Kailash to pass their helpless lives in mourning. Here they discussed what would be best for them, and what would be the right course to take to avoid the troubles and miseries of life. They talked with one another on such subjects as what was the best good of humanity in this world of morality, and many other subjects such as what is true greatness, best riches and affluence, and the highest good of mankind. What is the good of great power, possessions, being chief, or even the gain of a kingdom? What forms the true dignity of kings and the high majesty of emperors? What avails the rule of the great Indra, which is lost in one moment of Brahma? What endures a whole kalpa, and must be the best good as the most lasting? As they were talking in this manner, they were interrupted by the eldest brother, with a voice as grave as that of a leader of a herd of deer to the attentive herd. Of all kinds of riches and dignities, there is one thing that endures for a whole kalpa and is never destroyed. This is the state of Brahma, which I prize above all things. Hearing this, all the good sons of Indu exclaimed in one voice, "Ah, well said." Then they honored the eldest with the kind speeches. They said, "O how, brother, is it possible for us to attain to the state of Brahma, who is seated on a seat of lotuses, and is adored by all in this world?" The eldest then replied to his younger brother, saying, "O you, my worthy brothers, do as I say, and you will be successful. Sit in lotus posture, and think yourselves to be the bright Brahma, full of his brilliance and possessing the powers of creation and annihilation in yourself. Being instructed in this manner by the eldest brother, the younger brothers responded, saying, Amen. With gladness in their hearts, they sat in meditation together with the eldest brother. They remained in their meditative mood like the still images in a painting. Their minds were concentrated in the inmost Brahma, whom they adored and thought upon thinking. Here I sit on the middle of a full-blown lotus and find myself as Brahma, the great God, the creator and sustainer of the universe. I find in me the whole ritual of sacrificial rites, the Vedas with their branches and supplements, and the Rishis. I view in me the Saraswati and the Gayatri mantras of the Vedas, and all the gods and men situated in me. I see in me the spheres of the regions of the world, of the circles of the spiritual masters, revolving about me, with the spacious heavens bespangled with the stars. I see this globe of land and water decorated with all its oceans and continents, its mountains and islands, hanging like an earring in the material system. Within myself I have the hollow of the infernal world with its demons and serpents. I have the cavity of the sky in myself, containing the homes and maidens of the immortals. There is a strong-armed Indra, the tormentor of the lords of people, the sole lord of the three worlds, who receives the sacrifice of men. I see the bright net of the firmament spread over all sides of heaven, and the 12 suns of the 12 months dispensing their ceaseless beams amidst us. I see the righteous rulers of the sky and the rulers of men protecting their respective regions and people with the same care as cowherds take to protect their cattle. I find every day among all sorts of beings some rising and falling, and others diving and floating, like the constant waves of the sea. It is I who create, preserve, and destroy the worlds. I remain in myself and pervade over all existence as the Lord of all. I observe in myself the revolution of years and ages, and of all seasons and time, and I find the same time to be both the creator and destroyer of things. I see a kalpa passing away before me, and the night of Brahma disillusion stretched out in my presence, while I reside forever in the Supreme Soul, as full and perfect as the Divine Spirit itself. Thus these Brahmins, the 10 sons of Indu, remained in this sort of samadhi meditation in their motionless posture, like fixed rocks and like images hewn out of stones in a hill. In this manner these Brahmins, being fully acquainted with the nature of Brahma, and possessed of the spirit of the deity in themselves, continued in their meditation for a long period. They sat in their lotus posture on seats of kusha grass, freed from the snare of the fickle and frivolous desires of this false and frail world. Book 3, Chapter 87. 10 brother Eindavas become the 10 worlds of the next day of Brahma. The sun said, O great Father of creation, in this way these venerable Brahmins remained at that spot for a long time, occupied in their minds with these various thoughts and their several actions. They remained in this state until their bodies dried up by the exposure to the sun and air, and dropped down in time like the withered leaves of trees. Their dead bodies were devoured by the voracious beasts of the forest, or tossed about like some ripe fruit by monkeys on the hill. These Brahmins, their thoughts turned away from outward objects and concentrated on Brahma, continued enjoying divine joy in their spirit until the close of the Kalpa cycle at the end of the 4 ages yugas. At the end of the Kalpa, there is an utter extinction of sunlight by the constant rains poured down by the heavy Pushkara and Avataka clouds at the great flood, when the hurricane of desolation blew on all sides and buried all beings under the universal ocean. It was then your Brahma's dark night, and the previous creation slept, as if in yogic sleep, yoga nidra, in your sleeping self. Thus, continuing in your spirit, you contained all things in their spiritual forms in yourself. Upon your waking this day with your desire of creation, all these things are exhibited to your view, like a copy of everything that was already in your inmost mind of spirit. I have thus related to you, O Brahma, how these 10 Brahmins were personified as so many Brahmas. These 10 have become the 10 bright orbs situated in the empty sphere of your mind. I am the eldest among them, consecrated in this temple of the sky and appointed by you, O Lord of all, to regulate the portions of time on earthly beings. Now I have given you a full account of the 10 orbs of heaven, which are no other than the 10 persons united in the mind of Brahma, and now appearing as detached from them. This beautiful world that you behold appearing to your view with all its wonderful structure spread out in the skies serves at best as a snare to entrap your senses and delude your understanding by taking the unrealities and realities in your mind. Book 3, Chapter 88. Detachment of Brahma, need to act. Only one's own mind can change one's own mind. Brahma said to Vasistha, O Brahman, who is the best of Brahmans, the sun god, remained silent after telling me about the 10 Brahmans. I thought upon this for some time in my mind, and said, O sun, tell me what I am to create next. Tell me, O sun, what need is there for me to make any more worlds after these 10 globes have come into existence? Now, O great sage, the sun, having long considered in his mind about what I wanted him to say, replied to me in the following manner in appropriate words. The sun said, My lord, who is devoid of effort or desire, what need do you have to create? This work of creation is only for your pleasure. O Lord, who is free from desire and gives rise to the worlds like sunbeams raise water, and the sunshine is accompanied by the shadow. You are indifferent to fostering or forsaking your body, and need nothing to desire or renounce for your pleasure or pain. You, O Lord of creation, create all these only for the sake of your pleasure, and so you retract them all in yourself, as the sun by turns gives and withdraws its light. You who is unattached to the world, make your creation as a work of love to you, and not of any effort or endeavor on your part. If you desist from stretching creation out of your Supreme Spirit, what good can you derive from your inactivity? Do your duty as it may present itself to you, rather than remain inactive doing nothing. A dull person like a dirty mirror that does not reflect images is of no use at all. The wise have no desire of doing anything that is beyond their reach, but they never like to leave out anything that presents itself before them and is useful. Therefore do your work as it comes to you with a cheerful heart, a calm mind, and a tranquil soul, as if it were in your sleep, and devoid of desires that you can never reap. You derive pleasure, O Lord of worlds, from forming the orbs of the sons of Indu, so the Lord of gods will give you your reward for your works of creation. Nobody with their external organs of vision can see the worlds as clearly as you. O Lord, see with the eyes of your mind. For who, by seeing them with his eyes, can say whether you are created or uncreated? Only he who has created these worlds from his mind, and no other person with his open mind can behold me face to face. The 10 worlds are not the work of so many Brahmas as it appeared to you before. Nobody has the power to destroy them when they are seated so firmly in the mind. It is easy to destroy what is made by the hand, and to shut out the sensible objects from our perception. But who can annul or disregard what is ascertained by the mind? It is impossible for anyone except the owner to remove whatever belief is deep-rooted in the mind of living beings. No curse can remove from the mind whatever has become a habit of confirmed belief in the mind, even though it can kill the body. Principle deeply rooted in the mind forms the man according to its stamp. It is impossible by any means to make him otherwise, as it is impossible to make a rock bear fruit by watering its root like a tree. Book 3, Chapter 89. The story of the lovers Indra and Ahalya, the fixation of their minds on each other. The sun said, The mind is the maker and master of the world. The mind is this first supreme being, Purusha. Whatever is done by the mind is said to be done. The actions of the body are held as no act. Look at the capacity of the mind in the example of the sons of Indu. They were only ordinary Brahmins, but by their meditation of Brahma in their minds they became assimilated in Brahma. One thinking himself as composed of the body becomes subject to all the incidents of physicality, but he who knows himself as bodiless is freed from all evils that attend the body. Looking on the outside, we are subject to the feeling of pain and pleasure, but the inward-sighted yogi is unconscious of the pain or pleasure of this body. Thus is the mind that causes all errors in the world. Evidence of this is the example of Indra and his consort, Ahalya. Side note. The Yoga Vasistha story of 2 adulterous lovers, Indra and Ahalya, has many connections with another story that would have been well known to an Indian reader, that of Indra, king of the gods, seducing Ahalya, the wife of the sage Gautama, one of the 7 rishis. The sage cursed both Indra and his wife. The curse of Ahalya was removed by Rama. As the story became popular over time, the curse was that Ahalya was turned into a stone and came back to life when touched by Rama's foot. End of side note. Brahma said, Tell me, my lord's son, who was this Indra and who that Ahalya, so that by hearing my understanding may have its clear-sightedness. The son said, It is related, my lord, in former times there reigned a king of Magda, Indra Diyama, glorious Indra by name and similar to his namesake in prowess and fame. He had a wife fair as the moon, with eyes as beautiful as lotuses. Her name was Ahalya, and she resembled Rohini, the moon's favorite. In that city lived a rascal at the head of all libertines. He was the cheating son of a Brahmin, and was known by the same name of Indra. Now this Queen Ahalya came to hear the story of the former Ahalya, wife of Gautama, and her lust related to her at a certain time. The story of god Indra seducing Ahalya, the wife of sage Gautama. Hearing the story, Queen Ahalya felt a passion for the other Indra, the libertine, and became impatient in the absence of his company. She was thinking only how he should come to her. She was fading like a tender vine thrown adrift in a burning desert. She was burning with an inner flame on beds of cooling leaves of watery lotus and plantain trees. She was pining amidst all the enjoyments of her royal state, like a poor fish lying exposed on a dry bed of a pool in the summer heat. She lost her modesty with her self-possession. She repeated in her frenzy, "Here is Indra, and there he comes to me." Finding her in this pitiable plight, a lady of her palace took compassion on her and said, "I will safely conduct Indra before your ladyship in a short time." No sooner did she hear her companion say, "I will bring your desired object to you," than she opened her eyes with joy and fell prostrate at her feet, like one lotus flower falls before another. Then as the day passed on and the shade of night covered the face of nature, the lady made her haste to the house of Indra, the Brahman's boy. The clever lady used her persuasion as far as she could, and then succeeded to bring this Indra with her and present him before her royal mistress. She then adorned herself with paste and paints and wreathed the fragrant flowers, and conducted her lover to a private apartment where they enjoyed their full. The youth, also decorated in his jewels and necklaces, delighted her with his sweet caresses, and spring season renovates the tree groves with his luscious juice. Henceforward this ravished queen saw the world full with the figure of her beloved Indra, and she did not think much at all at the excellence of her royal lord her husband. After some time, certain facial indications by the queen caused the great king to know of her love for the Brahmin Indra. For as long as she thought of her lover Indra, her face glowed like the full-blown lotus, blooming with the beams of her moonlight lover. The Brahmin boy Indra also was inflamed with all his enraptured senses for love of her, and he could not remain for a moment in any place without her company. The king heard the painful news of their affections for each other and their unconcealed meeting. He also observed many examples of their attachment, and at different times gave them his reprimand and punishment as they deserved. They were both cast in the cold water of a tank in cold weather, where, instead of betraying any sign of pain, they kept smiling together as in their merriment. Then the king had them to be taken out of the tank and ordered them to repent for their crimes. But the infatuated pair was far from doing so, and replied to the king in the following manner: "Great king, as long as we continue to reflect on the unblemished beauty of each other's face, so long are we lost in the meditation of one another and forget our own selves. We are delighted in our persecution, as no torment can separate us from each other. We are not afraid of separation, even though you can separate our souls from our bodies." They were thrown into a frying pan upon fire, where they remained unhurt, and exclaimed, "We rejoice, O king, at the delight of our souls in thinking of one another." They were tied to the feet of elephants to be trampled, but they remained uninjured, and said, "King, we feel our hearty joy at our memories of each other." They were lashed with rods and straps and many other sorts of scourges, which the king devised from time to time. But being brought back from the scourging ground and asked about their suffering, they returned the same answers before. Moreover, said the Brahmin Indra to the king, "This world is full with the form of my beloved one. All your punishments inflict no pain on her, because she views the whole world as full of myself. Therefore all your punishments to torment the body can give no pain to the mind-soul, which is my true self, and constitutes my personality that resides in my person. This body is only an ideal form, and presents a shadowy appearance to view. You can pour out your punishment upon it for a while, but it amounts to no more than striking a shadow with a stick. Nobody can break down a brave, firm mind. Then tell me, great king, what do the powers of the mighty amount to? The causes that conspire to disturb the nature of the resolute mind are the false conception of external appearances. Therefore it is better to chastise such bodies which mislead the mind to err. The mind is forever firm, that is steadfast to its fixed purpose. The mind identifies with the object which it is constantly in its thoughts. Being and not being are words applicable to bodies. They do not apply to the mind, because what is positive in thought cannot be negated of it in any way. The mind is immovable and cannot be moved by any effort, like one can move bodies. It is impregnable to all external actions, and neither your anger or favor can have any effect on it. It is possible for men of strong resolution to change the course of their actions. But where is such a strong-minded man to be found, who is able to withstand or change the currents of his thoughts? It is impossible to move the mind from its fixed fulcrum, just as it is impractical for tender stags to remove a mountain from its base. This black-eyed beauty is the fixed prop of my mind. She is seated in the lofty temple of my mind like goddess Bhavani on Mount Kailash. I fear nothing as long as I see this beloved preserver of my life and soul before me. I sit amidst the conflagration of the burning mountain in summer's heat, but wherever I stand or fall, I am cooled under the shadow of her showering cloud. I think of nothing except the only object of my thought and wish. I cannot persuade myself to believe me as any other than Indra, the lover of Ahalya. It is by constant association that I have come to this belief of myself. I cannot think of me otherwise than that what is in my nature. Know, O king, that the wise have only one object in their thought and view. The mind, like Mount Meru, is not moved by threat or pity. It is the body that you can tame by the one or the other mean. The wise, O king, are masters of their mind. There is none and nothing to deter them from their purpose. Know it for certain, O king, that neither these bodies about us, nor these bodies and sensations of ours are realities. They are only shows of truth, and not the movers of the mind. On the contrary, it is the mind that supplies the bodies and senses with their powers of action, just like water supplies trees and branches with their sap. The mind is generally believed to be a sensuous and passive principle, wholly moved by the outward impression of senses. But in truth the mind is the active and moving principle of the organs of action. Because all the senses become dormant in absence of the action of the mind, so the functions of the whole creation are at a stop without the activity of the universal mind. Book 3, Chapter 90. Indra and Ahalya's Attachment Through Reincarnations. The sun said, the lotus-eyed king, thus defied by his perverse Indra, addressed sage Bharata, who was sitting by him. The king said, Lord, you are acquainted with all morality. See this ravisher of my wife, and hear the arrogant speech that he utters before our face. Please, O great sage, pronounce your curse upon him without delay, because it is a breach of justice to spare the wicked, just as it is to hurt the innocent. Being thus asked by the great king, Bharata, the best of the wise Munis, considered the crime of this wicked soul Indra. Then he pronounced his curse by saying, Do you, O reprobate sinner, soon meet with your perdition, together with a sinful woman, who is so faithless to her husband? Then they both replied to the king and his venerable sage, saying, What fools must you be to have wasted your curse, the great gain of your tapas, on our devoted heads? The curse you have pronounced can do us very little harm. Though our bodies should fall, yet it cannot affect our inner minds and spirits. The inner principle of the soul, owing to its inscrutable, subtle, and intellectual nature, can never be destroyed by anybody anywhere. The sun added, Then this fascinated pair, head over heels in love, fell down by effect of the curse, just like when branches cut from a tree fall upon the ground. Being subjected to the torment of reincarnation, they were both born as a pair of deer in mutual attachment, and then as a couple of turtle doves in their inseparable alliance. Afterwards, O Lord of our creation, this loving pair came to be born as man and woman, who by their practice of austerities came to be reborn at last as a Brahman and Brahmini. Thus the curse of Bharata was capable only of transforming their bodies. It never touched their minds or souls, which contained in their unshaken attachment in every state of their reincarnation. Therefore, wherever, in whatever shape they come to be reborn, they always assume the form of a male and female pair by virtue of their delusion and memories. Seeing the true love that existed between this loving pair in the forest, the trees also became enamored of the other sex of their own kind. Book 3, Chapter 91. Brahma wonders whether to create. Two aspects to the mind. The sun continued, My lord, therefore I say that the mind, like time, is indestructible by its nature, and the unavoidable curse of the sage could not alter its tenor. Therefore it is not right for you, O great Brahma, to destroy the ideal fabric of the air-drowned world of the sons of Indu. It is improper for great souls to put a check on others' fancies. O Lord of Lords, what are you lacking in this universe of so many worlds that should make your great soul pine for the air-built worlds of Indu's sun? The mind is truly the maker of worlds. It is known as the prime male, Purusha. Hence the mind, fixed to its purpose, is not to be shaken from it by the power of any curse, or by virtue of any drug or medicine, or even by any kind of chastisement. The mind, as the image of everybody, is not destructible like the body, but remains forever fixed to its purpose. Therefore, let the 10 Aindava brothers continue in their ideal act of creation. O Lord, who has made these creatures, remain firm in your place. See the infinite space spread before you, commensurate with the ample scope of your understanding in the triple spheres of your consciousness and mind and the vast emptiness of space. These threefold infinities of ethereal, mental, and intellectual spaces are only reflections of the infinite emptiness of divine consciousness. They supply you, O Brahma, with ample space to create as many worlds as you wish. You are at liberty at your pleasure to create whatever you like. When you have the power to create everything, do not think that the sons of Indu have robbed you of anything. Brahma said, after the sun had spoken to me in this manner concerning men in the other worlds, I reflected a while and then answered him, saying, Well have you said, O sun, for I see the ample space of air lying open before me. I also see my spacious mind and the vast comprehension of my consciousness. Therefore I will go on with my work of creation forever. I will immediately think about multitudes of material productions. O sun, I ordain you, as my first offspring, Manu, to produce all these for me. Now produce all things as you will, and according to my command, at which the brilliant sun readily compiled to my request. Then this great light stood with his two-part body of light and heat. With the first he shone like the sun in the middle of heaven. With the second, his body property of heat, he became my agent, Manu, in the nether world. He produced all things in the course of the revolution of his seasons, as I had asked him to do. Thus have I related to you, O sagely Vasistha, all about the nature and act of the mind and the omnipotence of the great soul that infuses its might into mind through its act of creation and production. Whatever reflection is represented in the mind manifests in a visible form and becomes compact and stands confessed before it. Look at the extraordinary power of the mind that raised ordinary Brahmin men to the rank of Brahma through their conception of it in themselves. As the individual souls of the Andavas were incorporated with Brahma through their intense thought of him within, so also have we attained to the level of Brahma. The mind is full of innate ideas, and the figure that lays a firm hold on the mind appears expressed outside in a visible shape. There is no material substance beside one's own mind. The mind is the wonderful attribute of the soul, and bears in itself many other properties, like the inborn pungency of pepper. These properties appear also as the mind, and are called its hyperphysical or mental faculties. It is a downright mistake on the part of some, Samkhya materialists, to understand them as belonging to the body. The same mind, when combined with its pure desires, is also called the living principle, jiva. After all is said, it is bodiless and unknown in its nature. There is nobody like me or any other person in this world except this wonderful and self-existent mind, which, like the sons of Indu, assumes the false conception of being real Brahmas themselves. As the Andavas were Brahmas in their minds, so my mind makes me a Brahma also. It is the mind that makes one such and such, according to the conception that he entertains of himself. It is only by a conceit of my mind that I think myself situated as Brahma in this place. Otherwise, all these material bodies are known to be as unreal, like the emptiness of the soul in which they abide. The unsullied mind approximates the divine by its constant meditation of the divine, but being spoiled by the variety of its desire, it becomes a living being, which at last turns to animal life and the living body. The intelligent body shines like any of the luminous orbs in the Andava world. It is brilliant with the intelligent soul, like the appearance of a visionary creation of the mind. All things are the production of the mind and reflections of itself, like the two moons in the sky, one being only a reflection of the other, and as the concept of man's world. There is nothing such as real or unreal, nor is there any personality such as I or you or any other. Real and unreal are both alike, unless it is the conception that makes something appear as a reality, which otherwise no reality of itself. Know the mind is both active and inert. It is vast owing to the vastness of its desire. It is lively on account of its spiritual nature of the great God. The mind becomes inert by its incorporation with material objects. The conception of phenomena as real cannot make them real, any more than the appearance of a golden bracelet can make it gold, or the phenomena appearing in Brahma can identify themselves with Brahma himself. Brahma being all in all, the inert also said to be intelligent, or else all beings from ourselves down to blocks are neither inert nor intelligent. It is said that lifeless blocks are without intelligence and perception, but everything that bears a like relation to another has its perception also like the other. Know that everything is sentient and has its perception or sensitivity. All things possess perception because of the relation between themselves and the Supreme Soul. Therefore the term inert and sensitive in their application to things existing in the one divine spirit are meaningless. It is like attributing fruit and flowers to the tree of a barren land. The barren waste refers to the vacuum of the divine mind, and its trees to its unsubstantial ideas, which are neither inert nor sentient like the fruit or flowers of the tree. Notion or thought formed by and an active consciousness is called the mind. Of these, the intelligent and intellectual part is the active principle, but the thought or mental part is quite inert. The intellectual part consists of the operation of exercise of consciousness, but the thoughts of that which is thought, which are the acts of consciousness, are known to be inert. These are viewed by the individual soul in the false light of the world. The nature of consciousness, chit, is pure unity, but the mind, chitta, situated within consciousness and therefore called established in the intellect, chit, sta, is a dualism of itself, and this appears in the form of duality in the world. Thus, by exercise of consciousness of itself as the other form, the ideal assumes the shape of the phenomenal world. Being indivisible in itself, it wanders through the labyrinth of errors with its other part of the mind. There is no error in the unity of consciousness, nor is the soul liable to err unless it is deluded by its belief in pluralities. Consciousness is as full as the ocean, with all its thoughts rising and sitting in it like endless waves. That which you call the mental part of consciousness is full of error and ignorance, and the ignorance of the intellectual part produces the errors of egoism and personality. There is no error or egoism or personality in the transcendental category of the divine soul, because it is the integrity of all consciousness, just as the sea is the collection of all its waves and water. The belief of egoism rises like any other thought of the mind, and is as inborn in it as water in the mirage, which does not actually really exist in it. The term ego is inapplicable to the pure and simply internal soul, which, being weakened by the gross idea of its ardent desire, takes the name of ego, just as a thickened coldness is called by the name of frost. The pure substance of consciousness forms the ideas of gross bodies, just as one dreams of his death in his sleep. All-pervading consciousness, which is the all-inherent and omnipotent soul, produces all forms in itself, of which there is no end until they are reduced to unity. The mind manifests various appearances in the forms of things, and being of a pure ethereal form, it assumes various shapes by its intellectual or spiritual body. Let the learned abstain from thoughts of the threefold forms of the pure intellectual, spiritual, and physical body, and reflect on them in their own mind as the reflection of divine consciousness. The mind, being cleansed of its darkness, like the mirror of its dirt, shows the golden color of spiritual light, replete with real joy, and by far more blissful than what his earthly cloud of body can ever yield. We should cleanse the mind that exists forever, rather than the body which is transient and non-existent, and which is as unreal as the tree living in the air, of which no one takes any notice. Those employed purifying their bodies under the impression that the body also is called the soul, Atma, are the ecstatic Karvakas, who are like silly goats among men. Whatever one thinks inwardly in himself, he is truly transformed to its likeness, as in the example of 10 Aindava Brahman sons, and like Indra and Hala cited before. Whatever is represented in the mirror of the mind, the same also appears in the figure of the body. But because neither this body nor anyone's ego last forever, it is right to forsake our desires. It is natural for everyone to think himself as an embodied being subject to death. It is like a boy who thinks he is possessed by a demon of his own imagination, until he gets rid of his false belief by the aid of reasoning. Book 3, Chapter 92. A strong mind is unaffected by curses. Vasistha added, "Now hear, O supportive Raghu's race, what I next asked of the lotus-born Lord Brahma, after we had finished the preceding conversation. I asked him, saying, Lord, you have spoken before of the irrevocable power of curses. Then how is it that their power is frustrated by men? We have witnessed the efficacy of curses pronounced with potent mantra anathemas to overpower the understanding and senses of living animals and paralyze every member of the body. The mind and body are as intimately connected with each other as motion with air and fluidity with a sesame seed. There is nobody except a creation of the mind, like the fantasies of visions and dreams, and like the false sight of water in the mirage, or the appearance of 2 moons in the sky. Or else, why is it that the dissolution of the one brings on the extinction of the other, such as the quiet of the mind is followed by the loss of bodily sensations? Tell me, my Lord, how is the mind unaffected by the power of curses and menace that subdue the senses? Are mind and senses both overpowered by curses, being the one and same thing?" Brahma replied, "No, there is nothing in the treasure house of this world that man cannot attain by means of his efforts in the right way. All species of animal beings, from the state of the highest Brahma down to the minute insects, are bicorporal. They are endowed with 2 bodies, mental and physical. The mental body is ever active and always fickle. The other is the worthless body of flesh, which is dull and inactive. The fleshy part of the body that accompanies all animal beings is overpowered by the influence of curses and charms practiced by the art of incantation. The influence of certain supernatural powers stupefies a man, making him dull and dumb. Sometimes one is about to droop down unconscious, as spellbound persons are deprived of their external senses and fall down like a drop of water from a lotus leaf. The mind, which is the other part of the body of embodied being, is ever free and not subdued, though it is always under the subjection of all living beings in the three worlds. He who can control his mind by continued patience on one hand, and by constant vigilance on the other, is the man of an unimpeachable character and unapproachable by calamity. The more a man employs the mental part of his body to its proper employment, the more successful he is in obtaining the object that he has in mind. Mere physical energy is never successful in any undertaking. It is only intellectual activity that is sure of success in any attempt. Focusing the mind in an effort to hurt objects unconnected with matter is as vain as trying to pierce a stone with an arrow. Drown the body under water, or tip it in the mud, burn it in fire, or fling it aloft in the air, yet the mind turns not from its orientation. He who is true to his purpose is sure of success. Intensity of physical effort overcomes all impediments, but only mental effort leads to ultimate success in every undertaking. Mark the example of the fictitious Brahmin boy Indra, who employed all his thoughts to assimilate himself into the very image of his beloved, and drowned all his bodily pains in the pleasure of his thoughts of her. Think of the manly fortitude of Mandavya, who, when he was about to be beheaded, made his mind as detached as marble, and was unconscious of his suffering. Think of the sage who fell into a dark pit while his mind was employed in some sacrificial rite. He was taken up to heaven in reward of his merit of his mental sacrifice. Remember also how the 10 sons of Indu, by virtue of their persevering tapas, obtained their status as Brahman, which even I have not the power to withhold. There have been many other such sages and masterminds among men and gods who never laid aside their mental energies, whereby they were crowned with success in their proper pursuits. No pain or sickness, no fulmination or threat, no malicious beast or evil spirit can break down the resolute mind any more than a lean lotus leaf strikingly can split the breast of a hard stone. Those who say you have been disturbed by tribulations and persecutions, I understand them as too infirm in their faith, and very weak both in their minds and courage. Men with heedful minds have never been entrapped in the snare of error in the perilous world. They have never been visited by the demon of despair in their sleeping or waking states. Therefore, let a man employ himself, exercising his own manly power, and engage his mind and mental energy to noble pursuits in the path of truth and holiness. The enlightened mind forgets its former darkness, and sees its objects in the true light. The thought that grows big in the mind swallows it up at last, just as the imagination of a ghost lays hold of a child's mind. The new reflection effaces the prior impression from the tablet of the mind, just as an earthen pot turning on a potter's wheel thinks no more of its nature of dirty clay. The mind, O Muni, is transformed in a moment to its new model, just like inflated water rises high into waves, spray and foam glaring with reflection of the sunlight. The mind, adverse to right investigation, sees like the blind everything in darkness, even in broad daylight, and observes by deception 2 moons for one in the moonshine. Whatever the mind has in view, it soon succeeds in accomplishing. Whether it does anything of good or evil, it reaps the rewards according in the gladness of bitterness of his soul. A wrong reflector reflects a thing in wrong light, just as a distracted lover sees a flame in moonbeams which makes him burn and consume in a state of distraction. It is the conception of the mind that makes salt seem sweet to taste by it giving a flavor to the salted food for our zest and delight. It is our conception that makes us see a forest in the fog, or a tower in the clouds appearing to the sight of the observer to be rising and falling by turn. In this manner, whatever shape the imagination gives to a thing, it appears in the same form before the mind's sight. Therefore, knowing this world of your imagination to be neither a reality nor unreality, stop seeing it in its various shapes and colors as they appear to view. Book 3, Chapter 93. Brahma as the Mind, a view of the genesis of the mind and body. Vasistha said, Rama, I will now tell you what the Lord Brahma himself taught me long ago. From the unspeakable Brahma there sprang all things in their indefinable ideal state. Then the Spirit of God, being condensed by his will, came to be produced of itself in the form of the mind. The mind formed the notions of the subtle elementary principles in itself and became a personal agent. It became a luminous body and was known as Brahma, the first male, Purusha. Therefore, Rama, know this same Brahma is situated in the Supreme, and, being a personification of the will of God, is called the mind. Therefore the mind, known as Lord Brahma, is a form of divine essence, and being full of desires in itself, sees all that it wills in their indefinable ideal forms present before it. The mind then framed or fell of itself in the delusion of seeing its ideal images as substantial. Therefore it is said that the world of phenomena is the work of Brahma. The world proceeds in this order from the Supreme Essence. That is why some suppose that its dull material particles came into being from another source. It is from that Brahma, O Rama, that all things situated in this concave world are in being, like waves rising on the surface of the deep. The self-existent Brahma that exists in the form of consciousness, Chit, before creation assumes the attribute of egoism and becomes manifest in the person of Brahma. All the other powers of consciousness that are concentrated in the personality of ego are equivalent to those of omnipotence. The world, being evolved from the eternal idea in divine consciousness, manifests itself in the mind of the great Father of all, Brahma. The mind, thus moving and modeling all things, is called the individual soul. These individual souls rise and move about in the empty sphere of infinite consciousness. These unfold by the elementary particles of matter and pass into the open space surrounded by air. Then they reside in the 14 kinds of animated nature according to the merit and demerit of their prior act. They enter bodies through the passage of their vital breath, and become the seeds of moving and immovable beings. They are then born of the generative organ, and they suddenly met with the desires of their previous birth. Thus led on by the currents of their wishes, they live up to reap the reward or retribution of their good or bad act in the world. Thus bound fast to the action and fettered in the mesh of desire, individual souls enchained in their bodies continue to rove about and rise and fall by turns in this changeful world. Scriptures say their wish is the cause of their happiness or sorrow, which is inseparable from the soul as will is from the mind. Thousands of individual souls are falling off as quickly as the leaves of forest trees. Carried away by the force of their pursuits, they are rolling about like fallen leaves blown upward by the breeze in the valleys. Many are brought down by their ignorance of divine consciousness, and are bound to innumerable birth on this earth, subject to unending reincarnation in various births. There are some who, having passed many mean births in this earth, have risen high in the scale of being by their tapas to better acts. Some persons acquainted with spirituality have reached their state of perfection, and have gone to heaven, like particles of seawater carried in the air by blowing winds. The production of all beings is from the Supreme Brahma, but their appearance and disappearance in this frail world are caused by their own actions. Hence the yogi without action is free from both these states. Our desires are poisonous plants bearing the fruits of pain and disappointment. They lead us to actions filled with danger and difficulty. These desires drive us to different countries and to distant hills and valleys in search of gain. This world, O Rama, is a jungle of withered trees and brambles. It requires the acts of reason to clear away these trees and bushes. So our mind and bodies are only plants and trees of our sorrow, which when rooted out by the acts of reason, will grow no more as reincarnations on this earth. Book 3, Chapter 94, 14 Grades of Beings, Brahma, the Origin of All. Vasistha said, Now hear me relate to you, Rama, the several classes of higher, lower, and middling species of beings, and the various grades of their existence here and elsewhere in the scale of creation. The first class in birth, idam, prathama, were the first to be produced. They are those whose long practice in a course of virtuous actions in prior states has secured to them the property of only goodness. The second grade is called the state of sound qualities, guna pavari. This is attained by the prosperous and led them to meritorious deeds, to the acquisition of their desired objects and their right dealings in the affairs of the world. The third grade is termed substantiality, sasattva, or the state of men of substance. It is attended with like results, proportioned to the righteous and unrighteous acts of men, who may obtain their liberation after 100 reincarnations of their souls on earth. The fourth grade, Adyanta Tamasi, comprises infatuated people who are addicted to their various desires in this changeful world, and come to the knowledge of truth after passing 1,000 lives in ignorance and sin, and suffering the effects proportionate to their good or evil deeds. The fifth grade is composed of men of a baser nature, called Adhama Sattva by the wise, and who may possibly have their liberation after a course of numberless births in different shapes and forms. The sixth grade is composed of those men involved in extreme darkness, Adyanta Tamasi, who are doubtful of their liberation, Sandiga Moksha, and continue in their vicious course of their past lives. Those who pass 2 or 3 previous births in other states, and are then born with the quality of gentleness, are in the 7th grade, called the gentry, Rajashi. The wise say that those who remain mindful of their duties, and are employed in discharge of them in this state of life, are entitled to their liberation soon after their death. Those among the gentry, Rajashi, whose acts are commensurate with those of gentlemen, and the nobility are included in the 8th class, and are called nobility Raja Satwiki, and are entitled to their liberation after a few births on earth. The 9th class comprises the noble nobility, Raja Rajashi, whose actions conform with their title, and who obtain their longed-for liberation after a course of 100 births in the same state. The next or 10th class is composed of the blinded gentry, Raja Tamasi, who act foolishly under their infatuation, and who are uncertain of their liberation even after 1,000 births. The most giddy of this class are called the excessively infatuated gentry, Adyanta Raja Tamashi. Their conduct in this life corresponds with their name, and their reincarnations do not cease at any time. Then the lower classes comprise the children of ignorant darkness, Tamas, of whom the Tamasas form the 11th grade, and are said to be deprived of their liberation forevermore. However, there have been a few among who have obtained their salvation by means of their divine knowledge and their good act during their lifetime. Next follows the 12th order, who combines the quality of darkness and enlightenment, Tamasa Rajasa, and who are liberated after 1,000 births in their former demonic states, and 100 births in their progressive improvements. Then comes the 13th order of those in the darkest darkness, Tamas Tamasi, who have to reincarnate for millions of years both in their prior and later birth before they can have their liberation from the bondage of body. Last comes the 14th order of being, who continue in their states of gross ignorance, Adyanti Tamasi, forever, and it is doubtful whether they can have their liberation at all. All other masses of living beings have also produced from the body of the great Brahma, just as the moving waves rise from the great body of water. As the lamp, flickering by its own heat, scatters its light on all sides, so does Brahma, glowing in himself, radiate his beams in the shape of a glittering particle spread all over the universe. As sparks are flung by the force of a burning fire, so these multitudes are produced beings rise from the substance of Brahma himself. As the dust and filaments of mandara flowers fly and fill the air on all sides, and as moonbeams shoot out of its orb to fill the 4 quarters of heaven and earth, so the minutiae of divine essence emanate from the deity and spread throughout the universe. As the variegated tree produces its leaves and flowers of various colors from itself, so the varieties of created beings spring from one Brahma, the source of all. As gold ornaments relate to the metal gold of which they were made, and wherein they exist, so all things and persons are in relation to Brahma, out of whom they have sprung and whom they abide. As drops of water are related to the pure water of the waterfall, so Rama are all things related to the uncreated Brahma, from which they issue like the drops. As the air in a pot or about a basin is the same as the air that surrounds heaven, so all individual objects are the same with the undivided spirit of the all-pervading Brahma. As raindrops and drops of water from waterspouts, whirlpools, and waves are identical with their parent waters, so are all these sights of phenomena the same as the great Brahma, from where they spring and where they exist and subside. As a mirage, by the fluctuation of sunbeams on sand, presents the appearance of a swelling sea wave, so all visible objects show themselves to the sight of the spectator, beside which they have no figure or form of themselves. Like cooling moonbeams and burning sunlight, so all things shine with their different luster derived from Brahma. It is he from whom all things have risen, and it is to him they return in their time, some after reincarnation of 1,000 births, and others after long periods of transmigrations in various bodies. All these various forms of beings in the multiform world are moving in their respective spheres by the will of the Lord. They come and go, rise and fall, and shine in their transitory forms, like the sparks of fire, fluttering and sparking for a moment, then falling, becoming extinct forever. Book 3, Chapter 95. Identity of mind and action. Vasistha said, "There is no difference between acts and agent. They have sprung together from the same source of their creator. They are the simultaneous growth of nature like flowers in their fragrance. When human souls are freed from their desires, they are united with the supreme soul of Brahma, just like the blueness of the sky, which appears distinct to the eye of the ignorant, is found to be joined with the clear firmament. Know, O Rama, that it is for the understanding of the ignorant that we say that individual souls have sprung from Brahma. In reality, they are only shadows of the same. Therefore, it is not right for the enlightened to say that such and such things are produced from Brahma when there is nothing that exists apart or separate from him. It is a mere fiction of speech to speak the world as creation or production, but it is difficult to explain the subject and object of the lecture without the use of such fictitious language. Hence the language of dualist and pluralist is adopted in monotheistic doctrines as figures of speech, just as they are in use in the popular language. This one is Brahma, or divine soul, and those others are the individual souls. It has been explained that the concrete world springs from the discrete Brahma because the production of something is the same as its material cause, though it seems different from it to common understanding. Multitudes of living beings, rising like the rocks of Meru and Mandara mountain, are joined with the main range from which they jut out. Thousands and thousands of living beings are constantly produced from their common source, like the innumerable offshoots of forest trees filling the woodland sky with their variegated foliage. An infinity of living beings will continue to spring from Brahma, like blades of grass sprouting from the earth below. They will likewise be reduced to Brahma, like the seasonal plants of spring that die in the hot weather of summer. There is no counting the living creatures that exist at any time, and what numbers are being born and are dying at any moment. Men with their duties proceed from the same divine source, like flowers growing with their fragrance from the same stem. All these subside in the same receptacle from whence they arise. We see different tribes of demons, brutes, men, and gods in this world coming to existence from non-existence, and this is repeated without end. We see no other cause for their continuous revolution in this manner, except the forgetfulness of their reminiscence, which makes them oblivious of their original state, and makes them conform with every mode of their reincarnation into new forms. Rama said, "For lack of such memory, I think that obeying the dictates of the infallible scriptures promulgated by the sages, and based on the authority of the Vedas, is the surest way for the salvation of mankind. And I reckon these men as holy and perfect who are possessed of the virtues of the great, having magnanimity and equanimity of their souls, and having received the light of the unknowable Brahma in them. I reckon two things to be the two eyes of the ignorant that allow them to discern the path of salvation. One is their good conduct, and the other their knowledge of the Scripture, which follows the former. Because one who is righteous only in his conduct, but is without knowledge, is never taken into account, and is slighted by all to be plunged into insignificance and misery. Again, sage, both men and the Vedas agree that acts and their actors come one after the other, and not, as you said, both arising simultaneously from their divine origin. Act makes the actor, and the actor does the work. Thus they follow one another like the seed and the tree which produce one another. This mutuality of both is seen in the practice of man and ordinances of the Vedas. Acts end the causes of animal birth as the seed gives birth to the sprouts of plants. In turn, works proceed from living beings like the sprout produces the seed. The desire that prompts a person to this particular pursuit, in his prison house of his world, the same yields him like fruits and no other. Such being the case, sage, why did you say that animals are produced from the seed of Brahma without causation from their prior act? You also said that prior acts cause the birth of animal beings. On one hand, by your position of their simultaneity, you ignored the law of antecedents and sequence of birth and action to one another. Then to say that Brahma is not the origin of actions, and that Brahma and other living beings are subject to their several actions, are self-contradictory propositions and opposed to common sense. This question upsets the doctrine of free will. Also to say that living beings are born together with their actions by predestination, and are bound to them to no purpose, is like saying that fish are caught by bait they cannot eat but cause their death. Therefore, sage, please tell me about the nature of acts, for you are best acquainted with the secrets of things, and can well answer my question on the subject. Vasistha replied, "My good Rama, you have asked well about this intricate subject. I will now explain to you in a manner that will enlighten your understanding. It is the activity of the mind that forms its thoughts and intentions, and which are the roots or seed of actions. It is its passivity that is the recipient of their results. Therefore, no sooner than did the principle of the mind spring from the essence of Brahma, that it was accompanied by its thoughts and actions in the bodies which the living beings assumed according to their prior deserts and inborn desires. As there is no difference between the flower and a fragrance, there is no distinction between the mind and its actions, which are one and the same. The exertion of bodily activity is called an action, but the wise well know that action is preceded by a mental action, which is called its thought in the mind. It is possible to deny the existence of material objects like air, water, hill, and others, but it is impossible to deny the operation of our mental faculties, of which we have subjective evidence in ourselves. No deliberate action of the present or past life goes for nothing. All human actions and efforts are attended with their just results, to which they are properly directed. As ink ceases to be ink without its inky blackness, so the mind ceases to exist without the action of its mental operation. Cessation of mental activity is attended with cessation of thought, and stillness of the mind is accompanied with a cessation of action. The liberated are free from both of these, but those who are not liberated from neither. The mind is ever united with its activity as fire with its heat, and the lack of either mind or action means the extinction of both. The mind, ever restless in itself, becomes identified with the action proceeding from its activity. In turn, the actions, whether good or bad, become identified with the mind, which feels their just rewards and punishments. Hence, Rama, you see the inseparable connection between mind and acts. They reciprocate their actions and reactions upon each other. Book 3, Chapter 96. Different Names for Mind. Vasistha said, "The mind is mere thought, and thought is the mind in motion. Its actions are directed by the nature of the thoughts, and the result of the acts is felt by everybody in his mind." Rama said, "Sage, please explain in more detail the immaterial mind as opposed to the material body, and its inseparable property of will or volition." Vasistha replied, "The nature of the mind is known to be composed of the property of will, which is an attribute of the infinite and almighty power of the Supreme Soul. The mind is known to be of the form of that self-moving principle which determines men's doubt between the affirmative and negative sides, as whether it is so or not. The mind is known to be of the form of ego, which is ignorant of the self-manifesting soul of God, and believes itself to be the subject of its thoughts and actions. The mind is of the nature of imagination, kalpana, which is always busy in its operation. Therefore, the inactivity of the mind is as impossible in this world as it is for an intelligent man not to think. As there is no difference in the essence of fire and heat, so there is no difference whatever between mind and its activity, and so between the mind and soul. The mind is known by many names according to its various faculties and functions, its various thoughts and desires, and their manifold operations and consequence. The divine mind is said to be distributed into all souls by mistake and without any reason, because the all is without any substance or substratum, and is indivisible in its nature. It is a mere fabrication of our desire and fancies to diversify it in different persons. Whoever has set his desire in anything as it were a reality, finds the same to be attended to with the like fruit as he had expected of it. It is the movement of the mind that is said and perceived by us to be the source of our action, and the action of the mind as various as the branches, leaves, and fruits of the trees. Whatever is determined by the mind is readily brought into performance by the external organs of action. Therefore, because the mind is the cause of action, it is identified with the effect. Mind, understanding, egoism, intellect, consciousness, action, and imagination, together with memory, desire, ignorance, and effort, are all synonyms of the mind. Sensation, nature, delusion, and actions are also words applied to the mind to bewilder one's understanding. The simultaneous collision of many sensations diverts the mind from its clear sight of the object of its thought, and causes it to turn about in many ways. Rama asked, "How is it, sage, that so many words with different meanings were invented to express the transcendent cause of our consciousness of the mind, and heap on them on the same solely for our own confusion?" Vasistha replied, "As man began to lose sight of his consciousness and labored under suppositions about his self, he found the mind to be the waking principle within him. When man, after considering himself and other things, comes to understand them in their true light, he is then said to have his understanding, buddhi. When man, by false conception of himself, assumes a personality by his pride, he is called an egoist, with the principle of ego or egoism causing his bondage on earth. Absolute egoism is doubting everything other than individual self-existence. Thought passes from one object to another in quick succession, and like the whims of children, shifts from one thing to another without forming a right judgment of any. The mind is identified with acts done by the exercise of a power immanent in itself as the agent. The result of the actions, whether physical or moral, good or bad, returns to the mind in their effects. The mind is said to be fanciful because it holds onto fleeting fantasies and ignores its solid and certain truth. It is also called imagination because it presents various images of the objects of its desire. It is called kakalaya sanyoga, or accidental assemblage of fancied objects. It is defined as the agglutinative and associative power that accumulates materials for imagination. Memory or retention is the power of mind to retain an image, whether known or unknown before, as it were a certainty already known. When attended with the effort of recalling it to mind, it is called recollection. Cravings to possess objects of past enjoyment and the mind's efforts to attain other things are called its desires. When the mind's clear sight of the light of the soul or self is hidden by the shadow of other gross things which appear to be real instead of the true spiritual, it is called ignorance. It is another name for deluded understanding. The next is doubt, which entraps the dubious mind in the snare of skepticism and tends to destroy the soul by causing it to disbelieve and forget the Supreme Spirit. The mind is called sensation because all its actions of hearing, feeling, seeing, smelling, thinking, and enjoying serve to delight the senses, which convey the impressions back to the mind. The mind that views all phenomena of nature in the Supreme Spirit and takes outward nature as a copy of the eternal mind of God is called nature itself. The mind is called Maya, or magic, because it converts the real into unreal, and the unreal into real. Showing realities as unrealities and vice versa by turns, the mind is called error, or mistake of our judgment, giving assent to what is untrue and is contrary. The cause of errors are said to be ignorance, avidya, and passions, tamas. The actions of the physical organs of senses are seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and smelling, but the mind is the cause of both action and their acts. The intellect, chit, bewildered in its view of the intellectual world, chetyas, manifests itself in the form of the mind and becomes the subject of the various functions that are attributed to it. Being changed into the category of the mind, consciousness loses its original state of purity and becomes subject to 100 desires of its own making. Its abstract knowledge of general truth becomes shadowed by its preconceptions of concrete and discrete gross bodies, so it comes to the knowledge of numbers and parts and is overwhelmed by the multiplicity of its thoughts and its objects of desire. Consciousness is variously named the living principle and the mind by most people on earth, but it is known as exercise of intellect and understanding, chitta, and buddhi by the wise. The learned give the intellect, spoiled by falling away from the soul, supreme soul, various names according to its successive phases and functions. The wise give intellect such different names because spoiled by its various desires and the variety of their objects. Rama said, "O sir, you are acquainted with all truth. Please tell me whether the mind is a material or immaterial thing. So far I have been unable to determine this." Vasistha replied, "The mind, O Rama, is not completely a gross substance or completely an intelligent principle. Originally it is as intelligent as consciousness, but being sullied by the evils of the world and the passions and desires of the body, it takes the name of the mind. Consciousness, chit, which is the cause of the world, is called heart, chitta, when it is situated in the bosom of sentient bodies with all its afflictions and feelings, avilam. Then it has a nature between goodness and badness. When the heart lacks a uniform certainty to its purpose and a steadiness in itself, it feels inside and reflects all the changes and vicissitudes of the outer world. Consciousness hanging between its own intelligence and a belief in gross objects takes the name of the mind. It is spoiled by contact with outward objects. When the action of consciousness or the faculty of the intellect's reasoning is weakened by sensations and becomes dull by its inward impurity, then it is called the mind, which is neither a gross material thing nor an intelligent spiritual principle. The intellectual principle is called by many names, such as mind, understanding, ego, and the individual soul or principle of animation. The mind bears its different names according to the variety of its functions, just like an actor in a theater appears under different names and costumes, depending on his dramatic part of the stage. As a man passes under many titles according to his various occupations and professions, so the mind takes different names according to the various operations of its nature. Besides the names that I have already mentioned for the mind, The disputants in mental philosophy have invented many others agreeable to their diverse theories. They have attributed many names to the mind according to the views in which they want to exhibit its nature, such as calling it intellect, understanding, or sensation, and so forth. One takes it as a dull matter and another as a living principle. Someone calls it ego, while others apply the term understanding. Rama, I have told you that individual ego, mind, the light of understanding, and the will to create are only different properties of the one and same internal principle. Nyaya philosophy has taken the mind in different lights according to its own view of them. The Sankhya system explains perception and senses in a very peculiar way to itself. In this manner, all these terms are taken in very different meaning by the different systems of Mimamsa, Vaikashika, Arata, and the Buddhist philosophy. The Pancharata and some other systems have given them particular meanings inconsistent with one another. All these various doctrines, arising at different times and in different countries, lead at last to the same Supreme Being, like the very many different ways leading their passengers to the same imperial city. Ignorance of the supreme truth and misunderstanding among conflicting doctrines, causing the adherents of different systems and sects to carry on endless and bitterly acrimonious disputes among themselves. The disputants maintain their particular positions by their respective dogmatism, just like passengers persist in their accustomed path as the best suited to them. It is wrong to say that everything is the fruit of our act, and therefore mankind should only be concerned with the performance of their actions. According to men's various perspectives, they have come up with their own explanations in their own ways. The mind receives its various names from its different functions, just like a man is called an early bather, Snataka, from his acts of sacred ablutions, and a donor from his religious gifts. As the actor gets many titles according to the different characters he performs, so the mind takes the names of the living being Jiva from its animation of the body and its desires. The mind is also said to be the heart that is perceived by everyone as residing within itself. A man without heart has no feeling or sensation. It is the heart that feels the inner pleasure or pain derived from sight or touch, hearing or smelling, and eating and drinking or pleasurable or painful things. As light shows the colors of things to sight, so the mind is the organ that reflects and shows the sensation of all sensible objects in the head. Whoever thinks the mind is a dull material substance, or whose gross understanding cannot understand the nature of consciousness, is the dullest of being. The mind is neither intelligence nor inert matter. It is individual ego that has sprung amidst the various joys and grief in the world. The mind that is one with divine consciousness perceives the world as absorbed into itself, but the mind polluted with matter falls into the error of taking the world for real. Know, Rama, that neither the pure, immaterial intellect, nor matter as gross as inert stone, can be the cause of the material world. Know, then, O Raghava, that neither intelligence nor inertia is the cause of the world. The mind is the cause of visible objects, just as the mind is the light which unfolds them to view. Where there is no mind, there is no perception of the outer world. Dull matter does not know of the existence of anything. Everything is extinct with the extinction of the mind. The mind has many synonyms depending on its many activities, just like the one continuous duration of time undergoes 100 different names depending on the variation of its time and season. If ego is not recognized as a mental action, and if sensations are reckoned as actions of the body, then the name living principle still applies to all acts of the body and mind. Whatever names or qualities of the mind are mentioned in the reasoning of different systems of philosophy, and sometimes by the advocates of an opinion, and at other times by their adversaries, they are neither intelligible nor distinguishable from one another. They are all powers of the same mind, which, like the flowing sea, pours into waters into innumerable outlets. As soon as men begin to attribute materialistic powers and forces to the nature of pure consciousness, they fall into the error of these varieties of their own making. As a spider lets out its thread from itself, in the same manner the inert has sprung from consciousness, and matter has come into existence from the ever-active spirit of Brahma. Ignorance has introduced various opinions concerning the essence of the mind. From those arose the various different expressions among opponents, all of which have the same meaning, consciousness. The same pure consciousness is labeled the mind, understanding, living principle, and egoism. The same is expressed by the words intelligence, heart, animation, and many other synonyms which, being taken as meaning the same thing, should put an end to all dispute. Book 3, Chapter 97. Three Spheres, Pure Consciousness, Mental and Physical. Rama said, O venerable sage, from all you have explained, I come to understand that this grandeur of the universe, being the work of the divine mind, is all derived from the same. Vasistha answered, As already said, the mind, having assumed a substantial form, manifested itself like water in a mirage raised by the shining blaze of its own light. The mind within the spirit of Brahma became one with the content of the world, now showing itself in the form of man, and now appearing as a god. Somewhere he shows himself as a demon, in another place like a yaksha. Here he was a Gandharva, and there in the form of a Kinnara. The vast expanse of the mind includes the many countries and pictures of many cities and habitable places. Such being the capacity of the mind, there is no counting the millions of bodies contained within it, like the trees and plants in a forest. All those are not worth our consideration on in our inquiry about the mind. It was this mind that spread out over the world with all its contents. Other than the mind, there exists nothing but the Supreme Spirit. The soul is beyond every category. It is omnipresent and the substratum of all existence. It is by the power of this soul that the mind moves and manifests itself. The mind is known as the cause of the body. The body is work of the mind. The mind is born and becomes extinct with the body, which the soul does not. The soul has no quality that belongs to the mind. By right reasoning, the mind is found to be a perishable object. When the mind perishes, the individual soul attains final liberation. The desire of the minds are the bondage of its reincarnation, but the dissolution of the mind and its desire secures its liberation. After mental desires cease, there is no more exertion for acts. This state is called liberation of individual souls from trouble and care. The mind, thus released, never comes to be born and die again. Rama said, Sage, you have said before that human nature is principally of three kinds, the good, the gentle, and the base, sattva, rajas, and tamas, and it is owing to the good or bad nature of their minds that men differ from one another. Now please tell me, how could the wonderful mind, with its good or bad propensities that are lacking in divine consciousness, originate from pure consciousness? Vasistha said, Rama, know that there are three spheres of infinite emptiness that are at immense distances from one another. These are the intellectual, mental, and physical spheres. These environments are common to all mankind, and they are spread out everywhere. They have all sprung and come to being from the essence of divine consciousness, Chit. Space is both inside and outside of everything, pervading throughout all nature. Space implies being occupied by something or its absence. Space is called the empty sphere of consciousness. Space is called the sphere of consciousness, which embraces all space and time, and which has spread out the other spheres of environments. Consciousness is the highest and best of all. The physical sphere, Bhuttakasha, element space, contains all created beings and extends to all 10 directions about, above, and below us. It is a space filled with air and supports the clouds and waters above the sky. Then the emptiness of the mental sphere, or mind space, which is also sprung from the sphere of consciousness, consciousness space, likewise has consciousness for its cause like the others, as the day is the source of all works and animal activities. What we call the mind is the spoiled intellect that views itself as a dull thing amidst the gross material objects of the physical sphere. It thinks of both spheres from where it is born and where it is placed. I have made use of the metaphor of spheres for the understanding of the unenlightened. Figures are used to instruct the unenlightened and not to lighten the enlightened. In the consciousness sphere, you will see one supreme Brahma filling its whole space, without parts or attributes, and intelligible only to the enlightened. The ignorant need to be instructed with appropriate words and precise language, showing the distinction between monotheism and belief in two gods, which is unnecessary for the instruction of the enlightened. I have contrived to explain to you the nature of divine knowledge by the parable of the three spheres, which will enlighten you as long as you are in the dark on the subject. The consciousness sphere is hidden by ignorance, so we are to look into the mental and physical spheres. They are as delusive as sunbeams in a mirage, and as destructive as the flames of fire. Pure consciousness, being changed to the state of the changeful mind, takes a debased figure. Then, being confounded in itself, the mind weaves the magic web of the world in which it becomes entangled. The ignorant, guided by the dictates of their perverted minds, know nothing about the nature of consciousness, which is identical with the Supreme. So the witless, who unwittingly mistakes white shells for bright silver, are seen to labor under their delusion until they are freed from it by the clear light of their understanding. Book 3, Chapter 98. Story of the Origin of the Heart, Deluded Men Punishing Themselves in the Desert, Vasistha speaking. Whatever may be the origin and nature of the human heart, which some take to be the mind, it should be always inquired into of seeking one's own liberation. The heart fixed in the Supreme becomes purified of its worldly desires and attachments. Then, O Rama, it perceives in itself that soul which transcends all imagination of the mind. The province of the heart is to secure the stillness of the world in itself. It lies in the power of the heart either to become trapped or get its freedom from the desires and trouble of the world. On this subject there hangs a curious tale relating to the legend of the heart. Brahma himself told me the story a long time ago, which I shall now share with you, Rama, if you will listen with attention. There is a long, open, and dreary desert named Ramatavi that was quite still and solitary and without an inhabitant. It was so vast that a pace in it was equal to a league. In it stood a man of a terrific and gigantic figure, with a sorrowful face and a troubled mind, having 1,000 arms and 1,000 eyes. He held many clubs and maces in his many arms, and he was using them to strike his own back and breast, then running away in his direction and that. Having struck himself fast and hard with his own hands, he fled 100 leagues for fear of someone laying a hold of him. Thus striking and crying and fleeing, he became tired and spent and lank in his legs and arms. He fell flat with his languid limbs in a large blind pit, amidst the deep gloom of the dark night, and in the depth of a dire dark cave. After a long time he scrambled out of the pit with difficulty, and again continued as before, running away and striking himself with his own hands. He ran a long way until at last he fell upon a thorny thicket of karanja plants that caught him tightly in its brambles, like a moth or grasshopper caught in the flame. With much difficulty he extricated himself from the prickles of the karanja thickets, and began to beat himself as before, and run in his wonted course as usual. Having gone a great way off from that place, he arrived at a grove of plantain trees under cooling moonbeams, where he sat for a while with a smiling face. Then he left the plantain grove and went running and beating himself in his usual way. Going again a great way in his hurry, and being exhausted in all his limbs and his whole body, he fell down again in a great and darksome ditch. Rising from the ditch, he entered a plantain forest, and coming out from that spot, he fell into another ditch, there in another karanja thicket. Thus he was falling into one ditch, after rising from thorny bushes and repeatedly beating himself and crying in secret. I saw him going on this way for a long time. Then with all my force I rushed forward and stopped him. I asked, "Who are you, sage, and why do you act in this manner? What business have you in this place, and why do you wail and trouble yourself for nothing?" "O Rama," he answered me, saying, "I am nobody, O sage, nor am I doing anything as you are saying. You have stricken me here, and you are my greatest enemy. You have seen me here, and you will persecute me, both to my great sorrow and delight." Saying so, he looked sorrowfully at his bruised body and limbs, then cried aloud, and wept a flood of tears that fell like a shower of rain on the forest ground. After a short while he ceased weeping, then looking at his limbs he laughed and cried aloud in his joy. After his laughter and loud shouts were over, hear, O Rama, what the man next did before me. He began to tear off and separate the members of his big body, and cast them away on all his sides. He first let his big head fall, then his arms, and afterwards his breast and his belly also. Thus the man, having cut off the parts of his body one after another, was now ready to remove himself elsewhere with only his legs by the decree of his destiny. After he had gone, another man appeared to my sight. He had the same form and figure as the previous one, and striking his own body like the other. He kept running with his big legs and outstretched stout arms until he fell into the pit, from where he rose again and resumed his flight as before. He fell into a pond, then rose and ran with his body ringing with pain. He fell again in hidden caves, then moved to the cooling shade of the forest trees. For some time, and to my horror and surprise, I watched him now ailing, now regaling, and now torturing himself with his own hands. I stopped him and asked what he was doing, to which he answered by returning to crying and laughter by turns. Finding at last his body and limbs losing their strength, he thought upon the power of destiny and the state of human lot, and was prepared to depart. I saw yet another following him on the same desert path. He also had been flying and torturing himself in the same way as the others had before. He fell into the same dark pit in his flight. I stood there for some time watching his sad and fearful plight. Finding after a long time that this wretched man was not climbing out of the pit, I advanced to help him up, when I saw another man following his footsteps. Seeing him to be of the same form, and hastening to his impending fall in a doleful pit, I ran to stop him with some question I had asked the others before. But, O lotus-eyed Rama, the man paid no heed to my question, and only said, "You must be a fool to know nothing of me. You wicked Brahmin," he said to me, then went on his course. I kept wandering in that dreadful desert on my own way. I saw many such men coming one after the other to their unavoidable ruin. Though I addressed each and every one of them, yet they softly glided away from me like phantoms in a dream. Some of them gave no heed to what I said, like a man pays no attention to a dead body. Some among the pit-fallen had the good fortune of rising again. Some were unable to get out of the plantain grove for a long while, and others were lost forever in the thorns and thistles of the Karanja thickets. There were some pious persons among them who had no place for their homes, even though the great desert was so very extensive, as I have told you already. This vast desert still exists, together with these sorts of men in it. That place is well known to you, Rama, as the common range of mankind. Do you remember it now, with all the culture of your mind from your early youth? Oh, that dreadful desert in this world, filled with thorns and dangers on all sides. It is a dark desert amidst the thick spread darkness. Nobody who comes here finds peace and quiet in his heart, except those who have acquired divine knowledge, which makes it a rose garden to them. Book 3, Chapter 99. Heart Origin, Deluded Man in the Desert Explained. Rama said, "What is that great desert, sage? When did I see it, and how did I come to know it? Who were those men, and what were they doing?" Vasistha replied, "Attend, O great armed Rama, and I will tell you all. The great desert is not distant or different from this wilderness of the world. That which bears the name of the world is a deep and dark abyss in itself. Its hollowness is unfathomable and impassable. Its unreality appears as reality to the ignorant, and it is the great desert spoken of before. True reality is obtainable only by the light of reason, and only by the knowledge of one object. This one is full without union with any other. It is one and only by itself. The big-bodied men you saw wandering, they are the minds of men bound to the miseries of the world. Their observer was reason, personified as myself. Only I, by my guiding reason, and no other person can discern the folly of their mind. It is my business to awaken drowsy minds to the light of reason, just as it is the work of the sun by its enlivening rays to open lotus buds to bloom. My counsels have prevailed on some minds and hearts that have received them with attention, and they have turned away from earthly troubles to the way of true contentment and tranquillity. But there were others who paid no attention to my lectures because of their great ignorance. They fell down into the pit after I scolded them with reproof and rebuke. These deep and dark pits were no other than the pits of hell. The plantain groves that I described were the Nandana gardens of paradise. These gardens are the place of those minds that long for heavenly joys. The dark pits are the homes of hellish hearts that can never get their release from these dark dungeons. Those who, having once entered the plantain grove and never come out, are the minds of the virtuous filled with all their virtue. Those who fell in the Karanja thickets and were unable to extricate themselves from the thorns are the minds of men entangled into the snare of the world. Some minds that were enlightened with the knowledge of the truth got released from the snares, but the unenlightened are bound to repeat reincarnation. Souls subject to rebirth have their repeated rise and falls from higher to lower birth, and likewise vice versa. The thick thicket of Karanja brambles represents the bonds of conjugal and family relations. They are the source of various human desires that are springs of all other sorrows, difficulties, and dangers. Minds stuck in Karanja bushes are those repeatedly born in human bodies and repeatedly entangled in domestic attachments, from which all other animals are quite free. O supportive Raghu's race, the plantain grove that I described was cooling with moonbeams. Know that it is a refreshing arbor of heaven that gives delight to the soul. Those persons who placed here, who have their bodies filled with virtuous deeds and edified by persevering tapas and austerities, and whose souls are elevated above others. Those ignorant, thoughtless, and unmindful men who slighted my advice were themselves slighted by their own minds, which were deprived of the knowledge of their own souls and of their reason. Those who told me, "We are undone at your sight, and you are our greatest enemy," were demented fools, melting away with their lamentations. Those who were loudly wailing, weeping a flood of tears, were men who were bitterly sad in their minds because they were snatched from the snare of pleasure to which they had been so fondly attached. Those having a little sense and reason, but not arriving to the pure knowledge of God, bitterly complained in their hearts for being forced to give up their fond enjoyments of life. Those who came to their understanding wept over the pains they had inflicted on their bodies for the support of their families, and were grieved in their minds to leave behind the objects of their care, for whom they had taken such pain. The mind had had some light of reason, but had not yet arrived to divine knowledge, were still sorrowing for having to leave beyond their own bodies, which they had their previous lives. Those who smiled in the cheerfulness of their hearts were men who had come to the light of reason, and it was their reason that gave consolation to their hearts. The reasonable soul, removed from its bondage of the world, exults with joy to find itself liberated from the cares of life. Those men who laughed to scorn their battered and shattered bodies were happy to think about how they had rid themselves of the confine of their body and limbs, the accomplices of their actions. Those who laughed with scorn to see their falling body parts were happy to think in their minds that they were no better than instruments of their various labors in the world. Those who had come to the light of reason and had found their rest in the supreme state of joy, from a distance looked down with scorn upon the former homes of their meanness. The man I stopped, who asked with concern about what he was going to do, was made to understand how the power of wisdom could endure the desperate. The weakened limbs that gradually disappeared from sight meant the subjection of the members of the body to the control of the mind that is freed from its corruption by riches. The man with 1,000 arms and eyes is a symbol of the covetous mind which looks to and longs after everything, and wants to grasp all things as with so many hands. The man striking himself with his blows symbolized the torments that the man inflicts on his own mind by the strokes of his anxieties and cares. The man running away, striking hard blows upon his body, signified how the mind runs all about, being lashed at every moment by the strokes of his unsatisfied desires. The man who afflicts himself with his own desires, then flies this way and that, signifies his foolhardiness to hunt about everything and to be a runaway from himself. Thus every man is harassed by his ceaseless desires and yearns in his mind to fly to his Maker and set his heart to yoga meditation. All these ceaseless sorrows are the making of one's own mind, which, being worried at last by its constant anxieties, strives to retire from them and find its final repose in meditation. The mind is trapped in the net of its own wishes, just like the silkworm is trapped in a cocoon by the thread of its own making. The more a man's mind is afflicted by troubles, the more busily is it employed in its moral weakness, just like a boy indulges himself in his playfulness, unmindful of the evils waiting upon him. The mind of man is in the same plight as that of a foolish ape who straddles a half-split timber, struggles to pull it out, and loses its life by smashing its own testicles. No flight can release the mind unless it is practiced to resignation, restrained from its own pursuits, and constrained to the continued practice of pious meditation, which only can relieve its sorrows. The mind's misjudgments cause accumulated sorrow that increase in height like the peak of a mount. It is the government of the mind that melts our sorrow, like hoarfrost under sunbeams. Throughout your lifetime, accustom your mind to the righteous ways pointed out by the Scriptures. Restrain your appetites, govern your passion, and observe the silence of holy saints and sages. At last you will arrive at the holy state of holies, and rest under the cooling shade of holiness. You shall no more have to grieve under the disasters that happen to all mankind. Book 3, Chapter 100. Healing the Heart, all within God, no bondage or liberation. Vasistha continued, I have told you how the mind originates from the essence of the Supreme Being. It is of the same kind, and yet not the same with its source, but like the waves and waters of the sea. The minds of the enlightened are not different from the divine mind, because those who have knowledge of the community of waters do not regard the waves as different from the waves of the sea. The minds of the unenlightened are the cause of their error, because those not knowing the common property of water find a difference between waves and the sea. For the instruction of the unlearned, it is necessary to teach him about the relationship between significant words and their meanings. The Supreme Brahman is omnipotent, full and perfect, and without decay forever. The mind does not have these properties that belongs to the omnipresent soul. The Lord is almighty and omnipresent and distributes his all-diffusive power in proportion as he pleases to everyone he likes. Observe Rama, how intellectual powers are distributed in all animated bodies, and how his moving force is spread in the air, and his immobility rests in rocks and stones. His power of fluidity is deposited in water, and his power of inflammation is exhibited in fire. His emptiness manifests in vacuum, and his substantiality is in all solid substance. The omnipotence of Brahman is seen to stretch itself to all 10 sides of the universe. His power of annihilation is seen in the extinction of beings. His punishment is evident in the sorrow of the miserable. His joy is felt in the hearts of the holy, and his prowess is seen in the bodies of giants. His creative power is known in the works of his creation, and his power of destruction is displayed in the desolation of the world at the end of the great Kalpa age. Everything is situated in Brahma, just as the tree is contained in the seed of the same kind, and afterwards develops in its roots, sprouts, leaves, and branches, and finally its flowers and fruits. The power called the living principle is a reflection of God. It has a nature between the thinking mind and dull matter, and it is derived from Brahman. The nature of God is unchangeable, although it is usual to attribute many varieties to him, just like we call the same vegetable by different names at its different stage of growth, like a germ, a sprout, a shrub, a plant, and a tree. Rama, know that the entire world is Brahma, who is otherwise called the ego. He is the all-pervading soul and the everlasting stupendous fabric of the cosmos. That property in him that has the power of thinking is called the mind. The mind appears to be something other than the soul. Thus we falsely see peacocks' feathers in the sky and froth in whirlpools of water. The principle of thought, animation, mind, and life are only partial reflections of the divine soul. The form of mind is the faculty of thought, just as that of life is the power of motion. Thus the mind, being only the thinking power of Brahman, receives the name of Brahma. This power, appearing as a part of the impersonal Brahman, is identified with ego, the personal Brahma. It is our error to differ between the soul and mind, and Brahman and Brahma, because the properties that belong to the mind are the same as those of the self-existent soul. That which is variously named the principles of mind or thought is the same power of omnipotence that is settled in the mind. So all the properties of the individual soul are contained in and derived from the universal soul of Brahma, just like all the properties of vegetation, blossoming, and fructification of trees are contained in the seasons of spring, and are dispensed among plants agreeably to their respective soil, climate, and other environment. As the earth yields its various fruits and flowers in their season, so the hearts and minds of men entertain their thoughts and passions in their proper time, some appearing at one time and others at another. As the earth produces its harvest according to their particular soil and season, so the heart and mind exhibits their thoughts and feelings of their own accord and not caused by another. The number and forms that convey ideas are distinguished from others of the same kind, such as the figures in arithmetic and geometry. They are all expressed in words coined by the mind from the mint of the mind of Brahma, the original source of ideas. The mind adopts the same image as the reflection which it receives from without or the thoughts and imaginations it forms of itself. The example of the 10 Andava brothers serves to support this truth. The animated principle, Jiva, that is the cause of this creation, resides in the Supreme Spirit, like the fluctuation seen over the still waters of the ocean. The intelligent soul, as he beholds the innumerable waves, billows and surges of the sea rolling on the surface of the water, sees these hosts of creation to be moving in the essence of Brahma. There is no other reality that bears a name or form or figure of any action or motion except the Supreme Spirit, in which all things move about like waves of seawater. As the rising and falling and continuation and disappearance of the waves occur on the surface of the sea by the fluctuation of its water, so the creation, preservation, and annihilation of the universe takes place in Brahma by the agency of Brahma himself. It is by the inner heat of the spirit that Brahma causes this world to appear like a mirage in itself. Whatever varieties is present in its various scheme, they are all expansions and manifestations of the divine spirit. All causality and instrumentality, and their effects as well as their production, continuation, and destruction of all things, take place in Brahma himself, besides which there is no other cause whatever. There is no craving or pleasure or any desire or error in he who rests in dependence in the Supreme. How can one have any desire or error in himself who lives in the Supreme Self that is devoid of them? Everything is a form of the Supreme Self. All things are only forms of the Supreme Soul. The mind also is a form of it, just like a golden ornament is only a form of the gold. The mind that is ignorant of its supreme origin is called the individual soul. Its ignorance of the Supreme Soul resembles a friend who has alienated himself from his true friend. The mind misled by its ignorance of all the intelligent God imagines its own personality to be a reality. It is like one who believes his individual soul to be produced from nothing. The individual soul, although it is a particle of the Supreme Soul, shows itself in this world as no soul at all, but a form of mere physical vitality. Of the weak in understanding see 2 moons in the sky and are unable to distinguish the true moon from the false one. Because the soul is the only real entity, it is improper to speak of its bondage and liberation. The imputation of error to the soul is quite absurd in the sight of lexicographers who define it as infallible. It is a wrong impression to speak of the bondage of the soul, which is ever free from bonds. It is untrue to seek the emancipation of the soul, which is always emancipate. Rama asked, "Sometimes the mind is certain, then it becomes uncertain. How then do you say that the mind is not under the bondage of error?" Vasistha answered, "It is a false conceit of the ignorant to imagine its bondage. Emancipation is their imagination, an equally false conception. Ignorance of the Smrti scripture causes one to believe in its bondage and emancipation. In reality, there are no such things as bondage and liberation. Imagination represents an unreality as reality, even to men of enlightened understanding, like a rope represents the appearance of a snake even to the wise. The wise man knows no bondage or liberation or any error of any kind. All these three are only ideas of the ignorant. At first the mind, then its bondage and liberation, and afterwards its creation of the unsubstantial material world, are all only fabulous inventions that have come into vogue among men, as the story of the boy of old.